In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. A galaxy consumed by fire, torn apart by gods and monsters, where the line between salvation and damnation fades into shadow. And yet, among the endless battles, the crusades, and the cries of 10,000 worlds, there lies a secret. A secret so vast, so dangerous, that even the High Lords dare not speak its name. He is called the Master of Mankind, the God Emperor, the immoral ruler of Terra, bound to the Golden Throne for over 10,000 years. To billions, he is a God of light and salvation. To his enemies, he is the tyrant of Terra, the false idol who shackled humanity to eternal war. But who was he, truly? They tell us the Emperor's will is eternal, that he guides the Imperium through visions, through miracles, through faith. But faith is fragile, and behind the veil of faith lies something else. Something forbidden. The truths the Imperium will never allow to be spoken aloud. This is the Emperor's secret. A hidden story of sacrifice, betrayal, and silence. A truth buried deep beneath Terra, locked away in vaults of ash and bone. And tonight, you shall hear it. The Imperium of Man is built upon a single truth. Not the truth of science, not the truth of history, but the truth of faith. Across a million worlds, from the hive cities of Necromunda to the barren wastes of Armageddon, the same prayer is whispered. The Emperor protects. For billions, he is not merely a ruler. He is not simply a man bound to the Golden Throne. He is God, eternal, omnipotent, the light of humanity, guiding his children across the stars. Temples rise in his name. Priests chant his glory day and night. On every battlefield, soldiers march to certain death, sustained only by their conviction that their sacrifice feeds his eternal will. To speak against him is heresy. To doubt him is death. This is the myth. The God Emperor, a figure larger than life, untouched by time, radiant as the sun. But myths are made, not born. And in the shadows of the Imperium, the question lingers. What is myth and what is reality? Long before the Imperium, before the age of technology, before mankind spread like wildfire across the galaxy, there were whispers. Legends of a figure who walked among men, guiding kings and prophets, shaping history from the shadows. The chronicles of old Earth speak of an immortal wanderer, a silent guardian who bore countless names across countless eras. Some called him the shaman, others the prophet. Some even claimed he was Osiris, or Merlin, or the nameless stranger who appeared at moments of great upheaval. It is said he was born on Terra, in the distant cradle of humanity, tens of thousands of years before the Imperium itself. Born not of one man and one woman, but of thousands, a ritual, ancient and terrible, which the greatest shamans of the human race gave up their lives, their souls merging into a single being. Thus, the Emperor was born, a child carrying the collective wisdom, the power, the psychic essence of humanity's greatest seers. Not a god, but something far beyond a man. And yet, he was still mortal. He bled, he breathed, he walked the earth. He lived not in palaces, but among men, shaping destiny through the smallest of interventions. When a tyrant rose, the emperor appeared as a humble advisor. When a prophet faltered, he whispered visions of truth. When humanity strayed too far, he gently or violently corrected their course. Always present, always hidden, never revealing the full extent of his power. But with time came ambition. The emperor saw humanity grow, fracture, and fall. He saw empires rise only to collapse under their own greed. He saw the birth of science and the corruption of power. He saw humanity's gift, the warp, twist into madness and terror. And he knew, if left unchecked, mankind would destroy itself. Thus began his greatest work, to guide humanity not as a shadow, but as a sovereign, to rise from myth into reality, to forge an imperium that would span the stars. This was the dream of the emperor, not a dream of faith, not a dream of worship, but a dream of unity, of order, of survival. The Great Crusade was his answer. With the thunder of 1,000,000 space marines, he swept across the galaxy, reclaiming the scattered worlds of man. The legions marched under his banner, bringing light where there was darkness, order where there was anarchy. And yet, even in this age of triumph, he remained a mystery. He did not eat. He did not sleep. His face was rarely seen, hidden behind golden armor and the aura of divinity. To his sons, the Primarchs, he was father. To his armies, he was commander. To his people, he was God. But was he? The truth is harsher. The emperor never claimed godhood. He despised the very idea. He forbade worship. He rejected temples. He demanded loyalty not of faith, but of reason. And yet his very existence defied reason. He lived for centuries without aging. He commanded powers no man should possess. He created the Primarchs, demigods of flesh and steel, and from them, the Space Marines. He wielded knowledge of the warp, but did not fall to its corruption. He could burn a city with a thought, or heal the dying with a touch. How could such a being be anything less than divine? And so, the myth grew. Even as he silenced priests and burned idols, his people worshipped him in secret. Even as he declared himself a man, his very aura betrayed him. The paradox of the emperor was born, a god who denied his godhood. Some say this was his greatest mistake, that by denying his divinity, he created the very schism that would one day shatter the Imperium. For faith cannot be destroyed, and when men are told not to worship, they worship all the more. The emperor, in truth, was not myth. He was flesh, blood, will, and vision. But myth consumed him, and myth, once born, can never die. Thus begins our journey, to peel back the layers of worship and legend, to see the emperor not only as the god emperor, but as the man he once was, a man of vision, a man of silence, a man whose secrets may yet shape the fate of all humanity. The emperor's beginning is a riddle. No record from the administratum speaks of it. No tome of the ecclesiarchy dares to name it. And yet, scattered across the dust of old earth, fragments of forbidden history remain, whispered only by those who seek truth beyond faith. It is said the emperor was born not in a palace, but in a small Anatolian village, thousands of years before the Imperium. He was a child like any other, until the voices began. Voices of countless souls, shamans who had willingly ended their lives, pouring their essence into the newborn. This was no ordinary birth. It was an act of desperation, for humanity, in those distant ages, already teetered on the brink of destruction. Seekers were awakening, and with them came demons of the warp. The shamans, wise in their visions, knew that mankind would perish without a guardian. And so, they gave everything to create him. As a child, he is not worshipped. He was not feared. He was silent, watchful, observing humanity with eyes that had seen beyond the veil of time. He grew as any man would grow. But when others aged, he remained young. When others died, he endured. By the time his neighbors' bones were dust, he still walked the earth, unchanged. Across the centuries, he wandered. He lived many lives. A warrior in one age, a scholar in another, a healer, a king, a beggar. When mankind rose to greatness, he stepped aside. When mankind faltered, he appeared in secret, nudging destiny back onto its path. Some historians, those who dare to think beyond the creed of the ecclesiarchy, whisper that every great leap in human civilization was his doing. The fire of Prometheus, the laws of Hammurabi, the wisdom of philosophers, the courage of leaders, the cunning of strategists. Always a shadow behind the throne, never revealed. Yet there were times he did not remain hidden. When tyrants rose, he struck them down. When demons walked openly, he banished them with a thought. For though he wished to remain myth, the power within him could not always be disguised. And so, across ages, he became legend. In some tongues, he was worshipped as a sun god. In others, he was a wanderer in rags, offering wisdom to kings. But always, when the story ended, he vanished, leaving only fragments, leaving only whispers. Through millennia, humanity changed. Civilizations rose and fell. Empires stretched across continents, only to collapse into dust. The emperor endured it all, washing with patience that no ordinary man could possess, but patience has its limits. He saw what men could not, that history, though grand in scale, was but a circle repeating itself. Ambition led to power, power led to corruption, corruption led to ruin. Again and again and again, saw the warp seeping deeper into the hearts of men, whispers of demons growing louder with each century. Wars fought not only with steel and fire, but with nightmares and madness. He knew the age of shadows was coming, and that when it came, humanity would need more than a myth. It would need a leader, a sovereign, a vision that could unite a fractured species across the stars. Thus, he began to prepare. Not openly, not with armies or banners, but in silence. He gathered knowledge since lost, sorcery forbidden, technology long forgotten. He studied the warp, not as a servant, but as a master. He forged weapons in secret, and planned for wars not yet born. Some say he even manipulated bloodlines, subtly guiding human genetics through the ages, sowing seeds that would one day blossom into the primarchs. Others claim he bent time itself, ensuring that the future he foresaw would align with his grand design. Whether these tales are truth or legend, none can say, but what is known is this: by the time the age of strife began, the emperor was ready. The age of strife, a cataclysm of warp storms. Civilizations cut off from each other, sackers erupting in madness, possessed by demons, tearing worlds apart. Mankind broken, alone, dying. It was in this age of fire that the emperor stepped from the shadows, not as a wanderer, not as a hidden advisor, but as a conqueror, as the master of mankind. He raised armies on Terra, uniting the warring techno-barbarian tribes under his golden banner. He crushed tyrants who styled themselves kings of earth. He silenced sackers whose corruption threatened this. And for the first time, humanity bowed not to a myth, not to a whisper, but to a living sovereign. To some, he was salvation. To others, he was tyranny. But all knew this: he could not be stopped. The unification wars reshaped Terra, and when they ended, a new era began. The Emperor revealed his vision of a galaxy reborn, a great crusade to reunite all of mankind under one banner. A dream of order, a dream of survival, a dream that would demand blood, sacrifice, and silence. Thus, the myth became reality. The hidden guardian became the immortal emperor, and yet, even as he stood revealed, the mystery endured. For though he walked among men, none truly knew him. What he thought, what he feared, what he desired beyond victory. The Emperor of mankind was no longer a legend in the shadows, but he was still not a god. And yet, to the people who saw him command storms, forge demigods, and crush empires, what else could he be? This is the paradox that has haunted humanity for 10,000 years. The paradox that shapes the very core of the Imperium. Was the Emperor a man, or has he always been a god? When the age of strife reached its darkest, the Emperor struck, no longer hidden in shadows, no longer a nameless wanderer. He revealed himself as sovereign, the master of Terra, the destined ruler of mankind. The unification wars had broken the techno-barbarian tyrants of old Earth. Tribes that had feasted on blood and ruled with fire were crushed beneath golden banners. John lords and mutant warlords fell before his armies, and upon the ashes of their empires he built his throne. From the ruins of Terra he forged unity. From unity he forged conquest, and from conquest he forged destiny. The Emperor's dream was not Terra alone. It was the stars, for scattered across the galaxy, fragments of mankind had survived. Isolated, divided, mutated by warp storms, or enslaved by Xeno's masters. Humanity was fractured, and only a supreme hand could reunite it. This was the vision of the Great Crusade, a march across the galaxy, reclaiming human worlds, binding them under a single banner, the Imperium of Man. But to conquer the stars required more than armies of mortals. It required warriors who could not break, champions who could not falter, a new breed of soldier, born not of flesh alone, but of science, will, and vision. Thus, the Emperor created the Primarchs, 20 sons, each fused with fragments of his power, each designed to embody an aspect of his will. Warriors, leaders, demigods in human form, the perfect generals for a war without end. That fate, or perhaps the hand of chaos, scattered them across the galaxy before they could be raised by his side. Infants torn from Terra, flung into the void, lost upon alien worlds. And the Emperor, though mighty beyond comprehension, could not prevent their theft. Still, he did not despair. From the genetic legacy of the Primarchs, he created their reflections, the Space Marines, Astartes, superhuman warriors clad in ceramite, armed with bolter and blade, born to kill in his name. Each legion, a reflection of its Primarch. Each Primarch, a reflection of the Emperor himself. And so the Great Crusade began. World by world, system by system, the Imperium expanded. The Astronomicon, powered by the Emperor's psychic might, lit the warp like a beacon, guiding fleets across the stars. The legions brought fire and steel, diplomacy when they could, extermination when they must. To some worlds, the Imperium came as savior, freeing them from alien chains. To others, it came as conqueror, crushing their independence beneath Terra's will. But in every case, the result was the same: humanity united or destroyed. And through it all, the Emperor stood as the silent architect. Rarely speaking, rarely explaining, always commanding. To his sons, he was father but distant, unreachable. To his people, he was savior but untouchable, unyielding. The dream of unity was his gift, but his silence was his curse. For what was this dream? Was it salvation or tyranny? The Emperor promised no paradise. He did not promise freedom or peace or joy. He promised only survival. A galaxy ruled by order, where man would endure though at what cost. He forbade religion, even as his people worshipped him. He preached reason, even as his peasants defied all reason. He demanded obedience, even from his sons who longed for love. This was the paradox of the Great Crusade. is glorious. Yes, worlds were liberated, civilizations restored. But beneath the banners, beneath the victory parades, there was silence. The silence of a leader who would not explain himself. The silence of a father who would not share his heart. And in silence doubt grows. Some Primarchs saw the Emperor as God. Others saw him as tyrant. Some obeyed without question. Others resented his distance, his coldness, his unwillingness to confide in them. And the soldier who followed him, they saw miracles. They saw worlds transformed by his touch, demons banished by his presence, victories won that should have been impossible. How could they not believe he was divine? That whenever they worshiped, he silenced them. Whenever they prayed, he forbade them. For the Emperor despised gods. He sought not to be worshipped, but to build an Imperium where worship was unnecessary. But perhaps this was his greatest flaw, for in denying his divinity, he created hunger for it. In rejecting faith, he gave birth to fanaticism. And in forbidding worship, he ensured that one day, he would be worshipped above all others. This tension, the line between man and God, haunted every step of the crusade. And though his armies marched ever onward, though the galaxy trembled before the thunder of the legions, seeds of doubt were already sown, seeds that would one day bloom into rebellion. Still, in those years, the dream burned bright. For many, the Great Crusade was humanity's greatest age, a time when man rose from ruin, and the Emperor stood at the helm of destiny. The stars opened, the Imperium was born, and though his silence weighed heavy, his vision was undeniable. Unity, order, survival. This was the Emperor's gift, and this was the Emperor's burden. Thus the Great Crusade marched ever onward, bearing both glory and shadow. The Emperor was no god, but to those who saw him lead armies of superhumans, who saw him forge a galactic empire from ash, what else could he be? And so, the myth grew stronger. The God Emperor was born in the hearts of men, even as he denied it with his words. The dream of unity became intertwined with the dream of divinity, and reality blurred with legend. The man became a myth, the myth became a god, and the god remained silent. He was a conqueror, a visionary, a creator of gods in human flesh, but above all, he was silent. In the age of the Great Crusade, armies moved at his command. Legions fought and died by the millions. Worlds were remade, burned, or freed. Yet through it all, the Emperor himself spoke little. He rarely explained, he rarely comforted, he rarely revealed the thoughts that drove him. And in silence, the myths grew louder. His Primarch sons made in his image longed for his approval. They sought his love, his recognition, his trust. But the Emperor gave them little of it. To some, he offered guidance. To others, he offered cold command. And to most, he offered distance. Imagine 20 sons, each carrying the fire of creation in their veins, each yearning for the presence of their father. That their father remained beyond them, immortal, eternal, reachable. Some loved him despite it. Some hated him because of it. And some would one day betray him for it. Why was he silent? Why did he not explain the truth of his purpose, the truth of the warp, the truth of chaos? Why did he not trust his sons with the knowledge they might one day need? Some say it was wisdom, that his burden was too great, his knowledge too dangerous, that to share the truth would risk madness, corruption, or despair. Others say it was arrogance, that he believed only he could hold the truth, that none could stand at his level, none could understand his vision, and so he locked it within himself, even as the galaxy around him burned. Consider the irony. The Emperor despised gods. He despised the lies of divinity, the false promises of salvation. He sought to free humanity from superstition and worship. And yet, because he would not explain himself, because he remained silent, humanity turned him into the very thing he despised. They called him the God Emperor. They built temples in his name. They whispered prayers, even as he frayed them. And his sons, those who should have known better, even they argued among themselves. Was he a man, or was he a god? This silence became a weapon. It gave strength to some who projected their faith upon him. It gave doubt to others who saw tyranny in his absence of words. And in the shadows, it gave chaos an opening, for silence can be twisted. Silence can be filled with lies, and ere truth is withheld, falsehood grows. The ruinous powers needed no words from him. They only needed doubt. Doubt in his vision, doubt in his love, doubt in his very humanity, and perhaps he was not silent out of arrogance, nor out of wisdom. Perhaps he was silent because he was afraid. Not afraid of enemies, not afraid of war, but afraid of his own truth. For what was the Emperor truly? A man, a god, a weapon of the old ones, the last of an ancient line of shamans, reborn to guard humanity, or something older still, something born before history, before memory, before the first spark of civilization. If he spoke the truth, would his sons follow him, or abandon him? If humanity knew his origin, would they see salvation, or monstrosity? Perhaps silence was his only shield. Perhaps secrecy was the only way to preserve the dream. But secrecy has a cost, and silence is never eternal. For even as the Great Crusade triumphed, the seeds of heresy took root. The Primarchs whispered doubts in the dark. The legions wondered at the true nature of their master. The people worshipped the very God he forbade them to see. The Emperor's silence became a chasm, one that swallowed sons, legions, and empires whole. And though he may have thought himself beyond human weakness, this silence proved to be the most human of flaws. The Emperor was a man. The Emperor was a god. The Emperor was both and neither. His silence left the galaxy to decide for itself, and the galaxy would decide in blood. So ends the first chapter of his tale. The tale of the man behind the myth, the father who was absent, the conqueror who was silent, the savior who was called God against his will. This was the Emperor's secret. Not the weapons he forged, not the empire he built, but the silence that consumed. The sound of distant echoes, a low hum like a heartbeat beneath the surface of Terra. In the dark, something vast stirs. A voice begins to tell a story. Not a story of war, not yet, but a story of a dream. The Emperor of mankind, the master of humanity. To most, he is a god. To others, he is a tyrant. To the billions who whisper prayers in the silence of night, he is light itself. But behind every image, behind every title, there is something far more fragile. There is a dream. This dream is not carved into statues. It is not written in scripture. It is not sung by choirs of the ecclesiarchy. It is hidden, a secret so deep that even the Primarchs, those children of his own design, were denied its truth. What was this dream? What vision did the Emperor carry, hidden beneath the steel mask of command? It was a vision of freedom. Freedom from the warp. Freedom from the gods of chaos. For thousands upon thousands of years, humanity had relied upon the warp for travel. Its currents carried ships between stars. Its storms bent time and distance. It was both highway and prison, a place of madness, a place of predators. The Emperor knew the warp better than any living soul. He had seen the birth of the ruinous powers. He had walked among shamans, sorcerers, prophets. He had watched entire civilizations fall into damnation, and he knew absolutely, beyond doubt, that humanity could not endure if chained to this ocean of corruption forever. So he dreamed. He dreamed of a new path. Long before man, another race had walked the stars. The Elder, proud, radiant, arrogant. They had built the Webway, a labyrinth of hidden tunnels, immune to the tides of the warp. A network of corridors between suns, untouched by demons, safe from storms. Through it, their empires prospered. Through it, their arrogance grew. The Emperor saw what they had wrought. He saw the beauty of it. He saw the danger of it. For even the Eldar, with all their genius, had faltered. Their empire had rotted from within. Their decadence had torn reality itself. And from their fall, a god had been born, she who thirsts. Yet the dream lingered. If such a thing could be built once, it could be built again. But this time better. This time without the weakness of pride. The Emperor envisioned a webway for mankind. Not the shadowed halls of the Eldar, but corridors of golden light. A radiant network where ships of humanity would glide, never touching the warp. A sanctuary, eternal and secure, imagine it. A city beyond space, archways of radiant gold, bridges of crystal suspended in eternal night. No storms, no whispers, no claws of demons scratching at the hull of ships. Only silence, only light, only humanity, unbound. This was the dream. A dream not of conquest, but of liberation. A dream so fragile, it could never be spoken aloud. But why hide it? Why not tell the Primarchs? Why not share this vision, this shining goal, with the sons who would have died for him? Because dreams can be broken. Because hope, once betrayed, becomes poison. The Primarchs were weapons, each born from the Emperor's design, each a shard of his own soul, given flesh, but they were flawed, not by chance, not by his will, but by chaos, who had scattered them across the stars before they could grow under his hand. They were too unstable, too proud, too human. If he told them his plan, what then? Would Magnus seek to twist it with sorcery? Would Perturabo demand to command its construction? Would Horus, beloved Horus, see it as weakness and escape rather than a victory? The Emperor could not risk it. The dream had to remain in silence, a secret kept even from those he loved most. But secrets come at a cost, and the greater the secret, the greater the price. The Primarchs saw only half of his design. They saw the crusade. They saw conquest, war, the expansion of the Imperium. They thought that was the purpose. They thought that was the end. They never saw the hidden foundation being laid beneath Terra. They never saw the laborers, the seekers, the adepts working in darkness, carving the first corridors into reality itself. They never saw the Emperor's hands trembling not from weakness, but from the weight of a hope too fragile to share. And so they grew resentful. They thought he abandoned them. They thought he placed duty above love. They thought conquest was all he desired. In truth, he desired peace. But the silence he kept turned peace into betrayal. Picture the Emperor alone, high up on the mountains of Terra. The night stretched endless above him. The stars wheeled silently. He could feel them, billions of human souls across the galaxy, suffering, dying out, begging for salvation. And he dreamed of golden roads between those stars. He dreamed of laughter in place of screams. He dreamed of children playing in safe skies, never knowing the name of demons. But dreams are lonely things, especially when they must be kept in silence. This was the Emperor's hidden dream, the Webway Project, the golden path to salvation. But dreams, no matter how bright, cast shadows, and in those shadows chaos waits. In those shadows doubt grows. In those shadows betrayal takes root. The Webway Project was meant to save humanity, but it would become the spark of its greatest tragedy. The dream was born in silence, but a dream cannot remain only in the mind of a god. It must take form, it must become stone, it must become light. And so, beneath the cradle of humanity itself, the Emperor began to carve his vision into reality. Deep below the surface of Terra, beyond the ruins of forgotten ages, beneath even the catacombs of lost empires, a construction unlike any before it was underway. It was called the Webway Project, but almost no one knew its true name. To the laborers, it was simply the great work. To the adepts who studied fragments of impossible equations, it was the engine. To the Emperor, it was destiny. These were not mere tunnels, not stone, not steel. They were corridors of reality itself, hollowed into the fabric of the universe. Each passage, a wound carefully cut into the skin of space, yet stitched with wards so precise, so delicate, that demons could not enter. It was a second skin for mankind to walk upon, hidden artery of creation, invisible to the predatory eyes of chaos. Imagine walking there. The air is heavy with the dust of ancient machines. Every step echoes like thunder against the hollowed walls. Torches burn, but their flames bend strangely, as though reality itself resists being illuminated. The deeper you go, the quieter it becomes, until only the rhythm of your own breath remains. And then you hear it, the hum, a vibration too deep for the ear, but felt through the bones. The Webway stirring, awakening beneath Terra's crust. Who built such a thing? Not the Primarchs, not the legions. This work was too secret, too delicate, too dangerous. Instead, the Emperor drew upon the Mechanicum's brightest adepts. He selected seekers bound in silence. He chose savants whose eyes were sharpened like blades, each sworn to secrecy, each bound to the throne with oaths written in blood flame. They worked in darkness. Some went mad, some vanished, their souls devoured by mistakes too subtle to name. And yet the work continued, for the Emperor's will was absolute, and no sacrifice was too great for the salvation of mankind. Why here? Why not Mars, cradle of the Mechanicum? Why not Luna, where the Emperor first bound his armies? Because Terra was the heart, the cradle of humanity, the place where the first step into the Golden Age must be taken. If the Webway could be opened safely here, at the very center of the Imperium, then from it, golden arteries could spread outward, connecting 1,000 worlds. But Terra was also dangerous, for beneath its crust lay scars older than mankind itself. Ancient ruins of empires long forgotten, shadows of things that had watched the stars before man had e'en kindled fire. To build here was to disturb ghosts, and the Emperor, in his silence, disturbed them all. Above ground, the great crusade roared across the galaxy. Legions conquered world after world. Primarchs led armies in thunderous glory. The people believed the Emperor was with them, guiding them, but in truth, he was here, in the dark, bent over equations of light and stone, hiding a depths through rituals no mortal could understand. The Primarchs began to whisper, "Why has he abandoned us? Why does he leave us to wage his war while he hides upon Terra?" They did not see the Webway. They did not see the truth. They saw only absence. And in absence, doubt is born. Picture now a chamber. Its walls shimmer with light, not from torches, not from flame, but from reality itself unraveling and being rewoven. Golden lines race across obsidian stone. Geometric shapes burn in midair. Men scream as the equations cut too deep into their minds, carving madness where numbers should be. Yet the Emperor stands at the center unmoving, unshaken. His eyes burn brighter than the symbols around him. This was no construction. This was surgery upon the universe. The Webway beneath Terra was not merely a network of tunnels. It was a gate that would connect humanity to the hidden labyrinth beyond stars. Through it, ships would pass, armies would move, worlds would be bound not by the sea of madness, but by corridors of light. If completed, the warp would be nothing more than a memory. Chaos would be nothing more than a whisper, scratching outside a door forever locked. Humanity would ascend, free of fear. But the gate was unfinished. It trembled. It pulsed with unstable energy. It demanded sacrifice, time, secrecy, and the Emperor could not reveal it. Not yet. Not until it was perfect. Death's secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of rising. The Primarchs would one day learn of this hidden project. They would see it not as salvation, but as betrayal. And the dream, so carefully protected, would become the spark of disaster, for in the Webway beneath Terra, hope and doom were carved side by side. Listen closely. Even now, if you stand upon the soul of holy Terra, some say you can hear it. A hum, low and endless, deep beneath the ground. The heartbeat of a dream unfinished. The echo of a path humanity was never meant to see. The Webway waits, silent, broken, hidden. The Emperor's dream, still chained beneath the earth. Beneath Terra, the dream took form. A labyrinth of light, stitched into the skin of the universe itself. But above, among the stars, suns fought wars they did not understand. And in silence, doubt began to grow. The Primarchs were not fools. They were titans, crafted from fragments of the Emperor's own being. They could sense his absence. They could feel his distance. When the Great Crusade began, he marched beside them. His presence was a fire, a certainty, a beacon of perfection. But then he left, without warning. Without explanation. At first, they trusted. At first, they believed it was for a greater purpose. But years passed. Campaign after campaign was fought in his aim, but not in his presence. And in that vacuum, questions spread like cracks in glass. Picture a legion, stranded on a dead world. The skies black with storm, the soul soaked with blood. The Primarch stands at the center, victorious yet weary, and looks to the heavens. But the heavens are silent, no message, no word of their father. Only silence, heavy as chains, and silence is dangerous, for in silence, other voices rise. The warp is never still, it whispers, it tempts, it offers what the Emperor denied. The Primarchs, scattered across the galaxy, each heard those whispers in their own way. Some resisted, some bent, some listened more than they admitted. And then came Horus, the War Master, the favored son, the one who above all others longed for his father's approval. When Horus learned of the Emperor's secret, not in full, but in fragments, the seed of betrayal was planted. It happened in shadows, rumors carried by the Mechanicum, fragments of reports stolen from Terra, whispers of adepts vanishing into tunnels that should not exist. Horus, always sharp, always restless, began to piece them together. And when truth emerged, it was not salvation he saw, it was deception. The Emperor had hidden the greatest of all projects from his sons, from his armies, from the very empire they were bleeding to build. Why? Why trust strangers and adepts, but not the Primarchs? Why deny them the dream that gave purpose to all the wars they fought? To Horus, it was betrayal. The Webway was not proof of love, but proof of secrecy. Not unity, but exclusion. Imagine Horus stepping into the half-finished halls beneath Terra, the golden lines pulsing like veins, the air vibrating with the hum of reality reshaped. He sees workers bowing before equations they do not understand. He sees sackers screaming, their lives burned away to fuel the dream. And he sees no place for himself, no place for his brothers in this vision. The father he adored had locked them outside of paradise. This was the hidden lie. The Primarchs believed they were fighting for the Great Crusade, for the unification of mankind. But in truth, they were fighting to buy time. Time for the Emperor to finish his secret. Time for his dream to take shape without them. Their wars, their sacrifices, their victories, all of it was a distraction. They were tools, weapons, expendable, even in glory. For what is a weapon once its purpose is fulfilled, set aside, forgotten, abandoned? The Primarchs could not bear this thought, and so bitterness grew. For Horus, this bitterness was poison. It gnawed at his loyalty. It twisted his love into resentment. And when the gods of the warp came whispering, he was ready to listen. They offered him what his father would not trust. They told him what he already believed, that he had been betrayed, that the Emperor's dream did not include him, that his destiny lay not at his father's side, but against him. And so, the first cracks in the Imperium's foundation widened. A dream meant to save humanity had begun the war that nearly destroyed it. Picture father and son, once united, once inseparable, not divided by silence. The father holds a dream, fragile and bright, but keeps it hidden. The son holds a wound, raw and bleeding, fed by whispers. Neither speaks, neither understands, and so love curdles into hatred, and hatred ignites a galaxy. The lie was not simply the Webway. It was not only the secrecy. It was the silence itself, the refusal to share the truth. The Primarchs were not just soldiers. They were children. They longed for love, for recognition, for trust. And when they were denied it, they turned to the only voices that answered. Thus, the Emperor's silence became the warp's weapon, and the dream of golden light became the seed of a heresy darker than any war before or since. Listen again to the silence between words. That silence was the Emperor's weapon. That silence was the Emperor's curse, for in silence, dreams wither. In silence, sons turn away. And in silence, the greatest betrayal in human history was born. A Webway was meant to free humanity. Instead, its secrecy chained them all to war. The secret was uncovered. The lie was felt. and the wound between father and sons was torn open. What began as silence became suspicion. What began as a dream became the seed of rebellion. Trust is fragile, especially when it is withheld. The Primarchs had marched across the stars in the Emperor's name. They had slaughtered, conquered, built, and bled for his vision. But they had done so in ignorance. When the truth of the Webway surfaced, it was as if ground beneath them cracked. The foundation of loyalty was shaken. Every order, every campaign, every word of their father now seemed poisoned by deception. They asked themselves, if he could hide this from us, what else has he hidden? If he does not trust us with his greatest work, why should we trust him with our loyalty? And in that questioning, chaos found its opening. Picture the Imperium at that moment. Armies stretched across 1,000 worlds. Fleets burning fuel and lives in endless campaign. Primarchs commanding with pride, but with questions gnawing at their hearts. From the outside, the Imperium looked unstoppable. From within, it was hollowing, cracks spreading unseen, like fractures in glass before it shatters. The gods of chaos are patient. They do not need to invent lies. They only need to feed doubts already planted. And so they whispered, to Horus, to Magnus, to Lorgar, to Fulgrim. They twisted the silence of the Emperor into evidence of betrayal. They took the secrecy of the Webway Project and painted it as abandonment. The warp is not strong because it deceives. It is strong because it reflects. It shows men what they already fear. It makes their wounds fester until loyalty rots into treachery. The Emperor's silence became their greatest weapon. Meanwhile, beneath Terra, the dream faltered. The Webway gate was unstable, wards flickered, corridors trembled, and the constant pressure of the warp pressed harder against its walls. Magnus the Red, desperate to warn his father, tore a hole into Terra itself with sorcery. He shattered wards, broke seals, and unleashed demons into the half-finished Webway. What had been a sanctuary became an invasion point. The Emperor was forced to abandon his great work. The Webway, once humanity's future, became its greatest liability. Instead of salvation, it demanded a prison. The Golden Throne was no longer a bridge to paradise. It became a lock upon the gate, sealing the breach at the cost of the Emperor's life. Imagine golden halls collapsing, corridors of light flickering into darkness, workers screaming as shadows with claws burst through walls, the hum of creation turning into a howl of destruction. And at the center, the Emperor, holding the breach closed with his own will. A dream meant to save billions, reduced to ashes in a single moment of betrayal. What was the cost of this silence? The Horus Heresy, brother against brother, legions burning worlds, the galaxy plunged into fire. But deeper still, the cost was the death of the dream. The Webway Project, humanity's only chance to break free of chaos, was lost. Not only destroyed, but poisoned. Now, even to speak of it was heresy. Even to remember it was forbidden. The Emperor had gambled on secrecy. He had wagered that silence would protect the dream until it was strong enough to endure. Instead, silence shattered it. Picture the Emperor upon the Golden Throne, silent, burning, trapped. Does he regret? Does he wish he had spoken, trusted, shared the dream with his sons before it was too late? Or does he remain steadfast, believing still that silence was necessary, even if it cost everything? We cannot know. We will never know, for he speaks no more. Yet fragments of the Webway Project linger, ruins beneath Terra, echoes in forbidden archive, whispers among the Inquisition and the Adeptus Mechanicus. Some believe the Emperor still works upon it, even now, bound to the throne. That his mind, stretched across eternity, is still carving tunnels of light. That one day, when the stars are ready, he will rise and open the gate once more. Others say the dream is gone forever, that the Webway's a scar, not a salvation, that humanity's chained to the warp until the end of time. But the truth remains hidden, buried in silence. The Webway Project was the Emperor's hidden dream, a dream of freedom, a dream of light, a dream of humanity unbound by chaos. But dreams are fragile, and when kept in silence, they break. The Emperor's silence birthed mistrust. Mistrust birthed rebellion. Rebellion birthed a war that nearly ended everything. And so, beneath Terra, the dream lies dead, or perhaps not dead, but waiting for a day when silence finally breaks. When the Webway Project crumbled into ruin, it was not merely stone and wraith bone that shattered beneath the bowels of Terra. It was trust, it was faith, and it was the invisible bond between a father and his sons. The Emperor, in his silent majesty, withdrew deeper into the dungeons of the Imperial Palace. Every day became a ritual of secrecy, adepts and custodians descending into chambers forbidden even to most Primarchs. The air was heavy with the scent of burning incense and ozone from arcane machinery. And though no words were spoken aloud, a whisper traveled across the legions. The Emperor is hiding something. For Horus Lupercal, War Master of the Great Crusade, that whisper was more venomous than any demonic temptation. He had been raised not only as a general but as favored son, the brightest star in the firmament of the Primarch. The Emperor had trusted him to command the galaxy-spanning war, to unify worlds under the banner of the Imperial truth. And yet when the time came for dreams to be shared, for burdens to be lifted, Horus was kept in the dark. The title War Master had been both a crown and a chain. To lead the legions in his father's stead was a glory beyond measure, but also a mark of distance, a subtle reminder that the Emperor's gaze was fixed elsewhere, far below Terra's crust, rather than upon his sons among the stars. In the silence of the void, as fleets stretched across nebulae and armies trampled alien soil, Horus began to feel a chill. Not the chill of war, but the chill of neglect. Others felt it too. Perturabo, ever the builder of fortresses and breaker of sieges, longed for recognition, yet was treated as a blunt tool. Magnus the Red, whose psychic might could have been a pillar of the Emperor's hidden design, was instead warned away, shackled by prohibition. Even Rogel Dorn, the most loyal sentinel, began to wonder at the weight of orders that came without explanation. Each Primarch, in his own way, wrestled with the same unspoken question: why does our Father not trust us with the truth? And in that unguarded space, the warp listened. It did not strike at once with fire and terror. It began with echoes, shadows, subtle murmurs carried upon the Imperium. Where there was doubt, the warp sowed suspicion. Where there was longing, it offered fulfillment. And where there was pride, it promised godhood. Horus, more than any, became the focus of these whispers. On campaign, amidst triumph after triumph, he felt them in the silence between battles. Victories tasted hollow, for they were not shared with the one whose approval he craved most. In the quiet afterworlds were conquered, when cheering mortals raised banners of the Aquila, Horus would retreat to his chambers and ask the unanswerable, "Why has the Emperor left me alone?" The seeds of rebellion are never sown they are sown in neglect, in unanswered questions, in the hunger of a son who longs to be acknowledged. And though Horus still fought with loyalty blazing in his heart, the soul had been prepared. All it would take was a single wound, a single betrayal, or what felt like betrayal, for the roots to take hold and the seed to grow into poison. The great crusade rolled ever onward, a tidal wave of steel and fire sweeping across the stars. But beneath its triumphal banners, hairline fractures began to spread. The Primarchs, once united in purpose, grew restless, each nursing private doubts, each measuring the gulf between themselves and their father. It was on such a backdrop that Horus's own wounds began to fester. Though beloved by his brothers, though hailed as Warmaster by countless trillions, he bore a secret weight. The Emperor had departed, leaving no counsel, no explanation, only the burden of command and the silence of unanswered questions. Every order transmitted from Terra carried not reassurance, but distance, cold, precise, unyielding. It was as if the Emperor had withdrawn his very soul from the galaxy, leaving only his sons to wonder at his absence. Horus sought counsel among the legions. He spoke with Fulgrim, whose pursuit of perfection blinded him to his own corruption. He sparred with Angron, whose rage boiled endlessly against chains both real and imagined. He debated with Magnus, whose eyes burned with secrets half-seen, forbidden by their father's decree. And in every conversation, Horus heard the same echo: resentment, confusion, longing. The cracks between brothers widened, invisible to the mortal legions who followed them, but all too clear to the Primarchs themselves. The Emperor's silence became the most deafening voice of all. Had he explained the Webway Project, had he trusted them with the truth, perhaps their loyalty would have but to be treated as children, as tools to be wielded but never confided in, was a wound deeper than any blade. Even Lupercal's heart, once filled with the brightest flame of devotion, began to dim. The warp, ever watchful, poured its poison into these cracks. In dreams, Horus began to walk strange corridors, endless halls lit by baleful fire. He saw visions of his father enthroned not as savior, but as jailer. He heard whispers of a destiny denied him. Why should you kneel when you could rule? Each vision left him shaken, yet also intrigued. He told himself they were phantoms, illusions of a tired mind. But when they returned night after night, echoing his deepest doubts, he began to listen. Mortals, too, carried the seed of unrest. Among the remembrancers, artists, poets, and historians who chronicled the Great Crusade, rumors spread. They spoke of the Emperor's retreat, of his growing absence, of the strange, forbidden project beneath Terra. The Imperium's faith in the imperial truth had always been brittle, founded on silence rather than revelation. And where truth is withheld, myth grows like ivy, entwining stone until the foundations crack. Horus was not yet lost. He still fought with valor, still inspired his legion, still raised the banner of the Imperium on conquered worlds. But loyalty without understanding is fragile, and each battle fought, each victory won, was like pouring water into a vessel already cracked. It held, for a time, but the fracture widened. In the void between campaigns, Horus would look to the stars, seeking his father's light. But Terra was silent. The palace was silent. The Emperor was silent. And so, into that silence, the warp spoke louder still. It was on the world of Davin that the seed first sprouted blood. There, amidst the swamps and the rotting temples of forgotten gods, Horus was struck down. A blade, rusted and foul, pierced his flesh, not merely wounding his body, but poisoning his very soul. No Primarch was meant to fall so easily, yet the wound festered with sickness that no mortal medicine could cure. As Horus lay in the fevered haze of near death, his legion despaired. They sought every cure, every rite, every act of desperate faith. But none could halt the corruption eating away at the War Master's life. It was then that the Serpent Lodge, a cult festering in Davin's shadows, stepped forward with an offer, salvation, but at a cost unnamed. The desperate Mournival, those closest to Horus, agreed, for they could not imagine a galaxy without him. In the dark ritual that followed, Horus's spirit was cast adrift in the warp. There, in the swirling tempest of unreality, he walked corridors not of stone, but of memory and Tao. He saw visions of his father enthroned in cold majesty, draining humanity's soul to fuel a secret dream. He saw himself, abandoned, betrayed, the greatest son left ignorant while lesser mortals whispered lies in the dark. And he heard voices velvet, cunning, inexorable. Your father does not trust you. He fears you, for you are greater than he. The Imperium is a prison, and he has built its chains. You, Horus, could break them. Each word slid like venom into the cracks of his heart. The warp did not show him wild nightmares of demons. It showed him what he most feared was true, that his father had never intended to share the truth, that the Great Crusade itself was a lie, that he was nothing more than a weapon in a game he did not understand. And in those poisoned visions, Horus saw an alternative. Not the cold throne of Terra, but a galaxy ablaze with freedom. Not servitude, but sovereignty. Not silence, but glory eternal. The voices promised him brotherhood, worship, the very godhood denied him by the Emperor's silence. When Horus awoke, his fever broken, his wound miraculously healed, he was changed. The loyal son still smiled, still commanded, still spoke with the same warmth to his warriors. But behind his eyes, the doubt had become conviction. The silence of the Emperor was no longer a puzzle to be solved. It was a verdict of betrayal. And the whispers of the warp had become his confidants. Among his closest captains, Horus began to test the waters. Small words, subtle questions. Do you ever wonder why the Emperor left? Do you believe he truly trusts us? The answers varied, but many shared his disquiet. And in that quiet sharing, rebellion germinated. It did not yet wear the name of treachery. It wore the mask of curiosity, of speculation, of camaraderie. But beneath that mask, the roots of betrayal grew deep. The galaxy arched ever onward. Legions fought, worlds burned, thrones fell, but in the heart of the War Master, the war had already begun. And it was not a war against Xenos or heretics. It was a war against silence. The change within Horus did not blaze like fire. It smoldered like coals beneath ash. Outwardly, the War Master remained the figure of loyalty. He still led the Great Crusade with brilliance, still brought worlds to compliance, still bore the visage of a beloved son. But the warmth of devotion had cooled, replaced by something sharper, something hidden. His closest brothers began to feel it first. Sanguinius, with his angels in sight, sensed a shadow upon Horus's soul, though he could not name it. Magnus, bound by his own cursed visions, glimpsed threads of fate converging around the Warmaster, and despaired. Others, Perturabo, Angron, Kurz, found in Horus not warning, but kinship. In his doubts, they heard the echo of their own. Among the mortal legions, the change was invisible. Soldiers still worshipped the Warmaster's charisma, still followed him into battle with unshaken zeal. But within the Mournival, within the tight circle of captains and advisors closest to his heart, whispers spread. Some urged him to remain steadfast. Others urged him to question more deeply, to see in the Emperor's silence not wisdom, but betrayal. The Mournival fractured, its bonds straining under the same weight now burdened the galaxy. Horus himself, in private, wrestled with doubt and pride. At times he longed for reconciliation, for his father to call him to Terra, to speak at last of the hidden dream. At other times he raged how dare the Emperor, who owed his triumphs to the legions, retreat into secrecy and leave them to bear the cost. Each unanswered question became a stone in his heart. Each silence widened the gulf until it was no longer a gap, but a chasm. The warp watched the light. It did not press too hard, not yet. The gods of chaos were patient gardeners, watering the seed with visions, nurturing the doubt with whispers, until rebellion no longer seemed like heresy, but inevitability. They promised Horus not madness, but clarity, not damnation, but freedom, and in that cruel inversion, he found a twisted kind of truth. In the cold void of space, amidst 1,000 victories, Horus felt utterly alone. The cheers of armies could not drown the silence of Terra. The glory of conquest could not replace the voice of his father. And so he turned, slowly, inexorably, toward those who would speak to him even if their words were lies. Thus were the seeds of rebellion planted, not in the soul of hatred, but in soul of silence. The greatest Warmaster, the brightest sun, the exemplar of loyalty, began to dream of a world where he was no longer the servant of another man's secret. And in those dreams, rebellion blossomed. When the storm broke, it would not be sudden. It would be the culmination of every unanswered question, every hidden truth, every seed nurtured in shadow. The galaxy would burn not because Horus hated his father, but because his father had never told him why he must obey. The silence of the Emperor had spoken louder than words. And in that silence, the fate of the Imperium was sealed. The rebellion of Horus did not ignite in a single instant of betrayal. It smoldered in the absence of words, in the weight of unanswered questions. For though Horus drifted toward the shadows, what truly damned him was not the venom of the warp, but the silence of the Emperor. Why did the master of mankind remain mute? Why did he not gather his sons and explain the dream that burned within his mind, the dream of a humanity freed forever from the predations of the warp? Why did he choose secrecy over trust, distance over intimacy, command over confession? These questions haunted the legions as much as Horus himself. The Primarchs were not mere generals. They were demigods, beings raw of the Emperor's own genius, each bearing fragments of his design. And yet, in his silence, he He treated them as children, as flawed tools rather than trusted heirs. When Magnus sought understanding, he was punished. When Horus sought closeness, he was abandoned. Even Guilliman, the ever-faithful architect of order, wondered why the Imperium was being built on foundations never revealed. The silence cut deeper than any wound. In the endless councils of war, a warmaster spoke with fervor, the Primarchs debated fiercely, and billions of mortals followed blindly. But the one voice that mattered most was absent. The Emperor issued decrees, but no explanations. He commanded obedience, but offered no vision. The Great Crusade, so vast and terrible in scope, became a march without a destination known to any but him. Among the Primarchs, theories multiplied. Some believed the Emperor foresaw disaster should the truth be spoken. Perhaps, they said, he feared that knowledge of the warp's true nature would corrupt even his sons. Others whispered that he did not trust them at all, that, for all their brilliance, they were still flawed creations, unable to comprehend his true plan. And still others wondered if the Emperor himself was afraid not of chaos, but of weakness within his own heart. For Horus, these silences were daggers. He recalled the moments when his father had once laughed with him, spoken with warmth, guided him not as a soldier but as a son. Those days had vanished, replaced by distance, by cold directives sent across light years. The bond that had once anchored his loyalty now felt like a chain dragging him toward an unknown doom. And the warp, cunning as ever, took the shape of what the Emperor denied. In visions, Horus was offered dialogue. The dark voices spoke openly, promising clarity where his father gave only silence. They painted the Emperor as a tyrant, shaming humanity to his own pride. They promised Horus not only answers, but freedom, equality, brotherhood with his siblings unbound by the weight of secrecy. It was a cruel trick, but to a heart starved for words, even poisoned speech tastes sweet. Thus, the silence of the Emperor did not protect humanity from the dangers of chaos. It delivered his sons into chaos's waiting arms. In the endless centuries since the heresy, sages, inquisitors, and even ordinary soldiers have wrestled with a single riddle. Why did the Emperor remain silent? No historian has ever uncovered the full truth, but three great theories endure, whispered across the Imperium like half-remembered prayers. The calculating Emperor. In this vision, the master of mankind was not cruel, nor negligent, but perfectly rational. He foresaw the dangers of the warp with a clarity no other could match. He knew that even his sons, demigods though they were, carried flaws that chaos could exploit. To reveal the Webway Project, to unveil the true scope of his dream, would have been to invite their destruction before the plan could be realized. Better, then, to keep them ignorant, to let them march beneath banners they did not understand, until the day humanity quite freed from the shackles of the warp. In this theory, his silence was a weapon, sharp and terrible, wielded to preserve his design. A flawed Emperor. Others whisper that the Emperor, though mighty, was not beyond weakness. That in his heart, he distrusted even those he had created. The Primarchs were not mere sons. They were experiments, weapons designed for conquest. Perhaps, in his pride, he could not bear to share his dream with them, fearing that they might reject it or worse, surpass it. In this view, the silence was not strategy but arrogance. The failure of a father to love, to trust, to believe in those who yearned for his approval. It was not that he could not speak, but that he would not. And that refusal, born of pride, doomed his Imperium. The doomed Emperor. The darkest theory of all claims that the Emperor already knew the end. That from the moment he set his grand design in motion, he saw its failure written across the skein of time. Every battle, every victory, every world brought into compliance was but the prelude to an inevitable fall. And so, he did not speak because there was nothing to say. Why share a dream already destined to collapse? Why wound his sons with truths they could never change? In this vision, his silence was not calculation or arrogance, but resignation, the acceptance of a fate he could not avert. Each of these theories carries its own weight, its own bitter logic, but for the Primarchs who lived beneath his command, there was no comfort in speculation. They did not see strategy, or pride, or resignation. They saw only distance, and they felt only abandoned. And in that void, Horus found voices eager to fill the silence. The Emperor may have believed his silence protected the galaxy. In truth, it chained his sons to Tao. And from Tao, the galaxy would burn. Imagine the grand halls of the Imperial Palace on Terra. Marble floors gleam beneath the light of 1,000 braziers. Vaulted ceilings stretch into shadow, carved with visions of conquest and youth. And at the heart of it all stands the golden throne, silent, immovable, radiant with a power no mortal dares to name. Now picture a Primarch, one of the Emperor's chosen sons, walking those halls alone. The echoes of his armored boots reverberate like hollow drums. The air is heavy, perfumed with incense and ozone, yet barren of warmth. He remembers, dimly, the last time his father spoke to him not as commander to servant, but as father to child. A word of encouragement, a hand upon his shoulder, a shared glance that carried trust. Those memories feel ancient now, like relics buried beneath the dust of endless campaigns. For Horus, the silence was suffocating. He had been named War Master, champion of the Great Crusade, bearer of his father's authority. Yet in that mantle of power, he found only isolation. When the campaign grew bloody, when doubt gnawed at him, when questions burned in his heart, no answer came. The courtiers whispered, the custodians stood mute, the scribes recorded every decree, but the Emperor himself offered nothing. It was as though the throne had swallowed his voice, leaving only commands inscribed upon the air. Other Primarchs felt the same ghostly absence. Magnus sought guidance in the arcane, desperate to pierce the veil that separated him from his father's mind. Tiliman buried his unease beneath discipline, writing codices and laws in place of the words he longed to hear. Even Sanguinius, most beloved, most radiant of all the Emperor's sons, confessed in rare moments of solitude that he could not hear his father's voice anymore. He fought not only enemies on the battlefield, but the gnawing dread that his father no longer trusted. The silence became a specter. It haunted the grand chambers of the palace. It lingered in the void between stars, where fleets traveled for years without a single word of comfort. It echoed even in victory, for each triumph tasted hollow when the Emperor gave no acknowledgement. The Great Crusade marched on, yet behind its banners of glory there stretched a shadow, the emptiness of a father's voice withheld. For the Primarchs, this silence was not merely the absence of sound. It was the absence of recognition, of belonging, of purpose revealed. They were weapons wielded but never cherished, sons created but never embraced. And so, when whispers came, when chaos offered words in the darkness, they listened. Not because they were weak, but because they were starved. Words, even poison, became nourishment. Visions, even false, became and thus the silence of the Emperor became the loudest voice in their lives, shaping destiny not by what was spoken, but by what was forever left unsaid. Horus was not blind to the grandeur of his father's design. He had fought in the Great Crusade's name, bled for its banners, and carried the Emperor's vision across the stars. Yet when the weight of command grew unbearable, when his warders looked to him for certainty, he found no hand extended, no voice to steady his path. The Emperor was silent, as if watching from some unreachable height. And in that silence, doubt took root. Was he truly beloved, or merely useful? Had the Emperor raised him as a son, or only as a tool crafted with purpose, and discarded when that purpose waned? The void of unanswered questions gnawed at him far more than the wounds of any blade. Others whispered into that void. The voices, the warp, subtle and insidious, did what the Emperor's silence would not. They spoke. They offered comfort where there had been none, flattery where there had been neglect. They told Horus that he was more than a war master, he was destiny incarnate, the rightful heir not only to command, but to godhood itself. And though those whispers were poison, they were also the only words he received. Here lies the tragedy. Silence itself became a betrayal. Not because the Emperor despised his sons, but because he withheld the one thing they craved acknowledgement. In striving to guard his secret dream, in shielding the Webway Project and the hidden war against chaos, he left his greatest warriors vulnerable to the very corruption he feared. The silence that was meant to protect became the very wound through which treachery flowed. Imagine Horus upon his flagship, the vengeful spirit, staring into the void. His heart swells with loyalty, pride, doubt, rage all colliding, unresolved. He recalls the warmth of his father's presence long ago, and the cold of his silence now. And into that cold slips another voice, dark and honeyed, whispering of betrayal, destiny, and freedom. It is in that moment of absence that the seed of heresy takes root, watered not by hatred but by yearning. The other Primarchs would feel this wound in their own ways. Some resisted, some broke, some questioned until their loyalty became brittle. But all of them, in the deepest chambers of their hearts, asked the same question: why does our Father not speak? And the answer never came. Not from the throne, not from the palace, not from the golden figure whose silence stretched across the galaxy. Perhaps the Emperor believed his plan required secrecy. Perhaps he thought his sons too fragile for the truth. Or perhaps, like any flawed being, he simply erred blind to the cost of silence until it was too late. What is certain is this: the silence of the Emperor was not a pause, but a weapon turned against his own blood. It left the galaxy trembling on the edge of rebellion, and Horus, once the brightest of his sons, was the first to fall into its abyss. And thus, the stage was set for the greatest civil war the galaxy had ever known. A war not born of hatred alone, but of silence, absence, and the words that were never spoken. The halls of the Librarius Occultus were said to be forbidden to all but the highest scholars of the Imperium. There, among dust-covered tomes and locked data vaults, were questions too dangerous to be asked aloud. Questions about the Emperor, not the myth, not the golden idol enshrined upon Terra, but the being who once walked among his sons, who fought at the front of the Great Crusade, who smiled and spoke and then fell silent. The first question was simple, yet devastating. Why did he not speak when Horus rebelled? For when the War Master turned his armies against Terra, when brother struck down brother and entire legions burned in betrayal, the Emperor's voice remained distant. There were orders, yes, there were commands, delivered with precision. But there was no plea to loyalty, no fatherly cry to recall his sons from damnation. No words to bridge the chasm opening at the heart of humanity. Some claim it was strategy. The Emperor, they argue, understood that words alone could not sway Horus. Chaos had already poisoned him, twisting his mind until reason was but a shadow. Why waste breath on what was already lost? Better to wield silence as armor, to show unyielding strength rather than desperate persuasion. In this view, the Emperor was cold but not cruel. He calculated the odds, and he knew the galaxy could not be saved by sentiment. Others see it differently. They believe silence was not strength, but weakness, that the Emperor, so consumed by the burden of his secret war against chaos, could not bear the vulnerability of reaching out. He was a being of supreme intellect, yes, but not immune to pride. To admit fear, to plead with his son, to confess even a fragment of his hidden dream, this may have felt like defeat. And so he said nothing, even as everything crumbled around him. Imagine, for a moment, the battlefield of Istvan. Legions clashing, titans striding across ashen plains, brother slaying brother in storms of bolter fire. Above it all, Horus waits in his command chamber, armored in midnight, eyes blazing with the power of the warp. He listens not to his father's voice, but to the whispers of gods that promise him freedom, vengeance, and divinity. In that silence, the galaxy's fate tilts. One word from the Emperor might have changed nothing, or perhaps it might have changed everything. The question remains unanswered, and perhaps it must remain so. For the truth is dangerous. If the Emperor chose silence as strategy, then he sacrificed not only his sons, but the very bond of trust that united them. If he chose silence out of pride, then he was flawed, not divine. And if he chose silence because he simply could not see the storm rising, then he was blind and the galaxy followed a blind god into. And so, within the shadows of forbidden libraries and whispered debates, scholars, inquisitors, and even renegades return to the same truth. Silence is not absence. Silence itself is a choice. And the choice of the Emperor may have been the most devastating in human history. To some within the secretive circles of the Inquisition, the silence of the Emperor is not evidence of weakness. It is the ultimate proof of his design. They whisper that he was never meant to be a father in the mortal sense, nor a ruler bound by love or sentiment. He was and remains the supreme strategist, orchestrating a game so vast that even his sons could not grasp it. In this vision, every act of the Emperor is a move upon a cosmic board. The Primarchs, not children, but living pieces, each designed with precision, unleashed to claim the galaxy piece by piece. The Great Crusade, not a family's journey of conquest, but a calculated expansion, building a bulwark of worlds before the storm of chaos inevitably ascended. And silence itself was a weapon, for in withholding truth, he ensured that his sons could never compromise his true purpose, never betray the knowledge that would have doomed mankind had it fallen into the hands of the warp. Consider the Webway Project, buried deep beneath Terra. It was never for the Primarchs to know. If they had, would not one of them, Magnus, perhaps, in his reckless hunger for forbidden knowledge, have revealed its secrets to the enemy? Would Horus, in his pride, have claimed it for his own, believing himself the rightful heir? Better, then, that they knew nothing. Better that they fought blind, pawns upon the field, ignorant of the true end game. From this perspective, the Emperor's silence during the heresy was not neglect, but necessity. To reveal his plan in the midst of rebellion would have risked everything. The Webway was already shattered, the golden throne already consuming his strength. The only chance left was to endure, to hold Terra long enough to ensure that humanity's flame did not go out. The lives of his sons, even the brightest star that was Horus, were simply another price to be paid. It is a harsh interpretation, but one that explains much. Why did he not plead with Horus? Because he had already calculated the odds of redemption and found them too slim. Why did he not speak to his loyal sons, offering comfort or clarity? Because their loyalty to him was irrelevant. Their purpose was to buy time, to fight and die if need be, while he secured the throne that would preserve mankind against the eternal night. In this vision, the Emperor is less a father and more a god of logic, a being of pure design stripped of empathy. Love is weakness, trust is danger, silence is strength. And in that silence, he did not lose control, he exercised it, shaping the destiny of a species not with tender words, but with ruthless will. But if this is true, then a darker question follows. If the Emperor's silence was deliberate, then so too was the suffering of his sons. He forged them, abandoned them, and watched them break not by accident, but by design. What then does that make of the father of mankind, a savior, or the coldest tyrant the galaxy has ever known? There are other scholars, renegades, even whispering priests within the ecclesiarchy who reject the notion of the Emperor as flawless strategist. To them, his silence is not a weapon, but a wound. Not a design, but a failure. They see not a perfect God, but a man brilliant, yes, powerful beyond comprehension, but still bound by the flaw's mortality. For what is pride, if not the Emperor's greatest weakness? He created the Primarchs, beings of unmatched strength and intellect, yet he never trusted them with his true dream. Why? Because to share his vision would have been to admit dependence. To reveal the Webway Project, the true war against chaos, would have been to acknowledge that he could not fight alone. And perhaps he feared that omission more than he feared any enemy. Magnus sought to pierce that veil of secret. Again and again he pleaded for understanding, for guidance. Each time he was rebuffed, dismissed, or warned away. The thousand sons, gifted in psychic might, could have been allies in securing the Webway. Instead, they were cast as liabilities. The Emperor did not bend, even for a son who longed for. Was this foresight or blindness born of arrogance? And what of Horus? Was he not the one most deserving of honesty? The War Master, entrusted with the fate of the crusade, bearing responsibilities no mortal could endure. That when doubt gnawed at him, when loneliness closed in, when the voices of the warp reached for him in the silence, the Emperor did not speak. He left his brightest sun to wrestle alone with burdens too great, until whispers became chains. Some argue that this is not strategy at all, but fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of intimacy, fear of revealing the truth that even the Emperor could not control the storm entirely. For gods do not admit weakness, and to confess uncertainty would have shattered the image he cultivated. Better to remain silent, to preserve the illusion of omnipotence, even as his empire cracked beneath the strain. It is a tragic vision. The Emperor, a man raised by centuries of struggle and knowledge, unable to escape the very flaw that defines humanity, the refusal to trust, the need to control. He loved his sons in some fashion. Many believe that love was buried beneath ambition. And in the silence of ambition, love starved. Picture Horus again, this time not as the war master of legend, but as a son sitting in the shadow of his father's throne. He waits for a word of pride, of comfort, of faith. The word never comes, and so when another voice arrives, even false, even poison, he grasps it as drowning men grasp driftwood. The Emperor's silence did not protect him, it condemned him. If this is true, then the heresy was not inevitable. It was not destiny written in the stars. It was failure born of pride. A father who could not speak, a son who could not endure the void, and a galaxy that paid the price of their silence. And perhaps that is the most dangerous truth of all, that the savior of mankind was not a god at all, but a man, and like all men, he erred, and in his error, 10,000 years of war were born. Two visions of the Emperor now stand before us, like statues in a hall of paradox. In one, he is the grand strategist, every silence calculated, every withheld truth a shield against chaos, every sacrifice measured with cold precision. His sons were not abandoned, they were pawns, knowingly expended in the pursuit of a victory so vast that no mortal mind could conceive it. To weep for Horus, to plead with him, to reveal the webway or the hidden war, such actions would have endangered the entire Better to lose a son, better to watch a galaxy burn for a moment, than to forfeit the eternal survival of mankind. In this light, the Emperor is a god of logic, whose silence was not cruelty but necessity. In the other, he is a flawed being, a father whose pride prevented him from speaking, a leader who could not share his burden, who mistook control for wisdom and secrecy for strength. His silence was not a shield, but a weakness, a human failing magnified upon a divine state. In this vision, the Emperor did not merely lose Horus, he drove him into the arms of the enemy by refusing to speak the words that might have bound his loyalty. The galaxy burned not because it had to, but because its savior could not trust enough to speak. Which vision is true? No one can say. Perhaps both are. Perhaps in some moments the Emperor was the unyielding strategist, weighing the fates of trillions upon the scales of necessity, and in others, he was simply a man tired, proud, unwilling to admit weakness even to those he called sons. Perhaps divinity and humanity are not opposites, but entangled threads, woven into the same flawed being. What is certain is that silence shaped everything. The silence of the throne, the silence of the Father, the silence that echoed louder than any command. It forged doubt in the hearts of the Primarchs. It carved wounds deeper than blades or bolters. It allowed the whispers of the warp to sound like answers, when in truth they were chains. And so, for 10,000 years, the Imperium has lived not only with war, but with questions. Questions locked away in forbidden vaults, whispered by heretics, pondered by scholars who dare to look beyond the hymns of the ecclesiarchy. Did the Emperor choose silence to save us, or did he condemn us by it? Was he God, flawless in his strategy? Or was he man, broken by pride? The truth may never be known. Perhaps it cannot be known, for the Emperor himself is silent still, enthroned in eternal twilight. And in that silence, humanity continues to endure, fighting, dying, believing, never certain whether their God is their savior or their jailer. Maybe that is the final irony, that the greatest truth of the Imperium is not found in revelation, but in mystery. Not in what was said, but in what was forever withheld. And so long as the throne burns, so long as the Emperor remains silent, the galaxy will march onward, united not by truth, but by the shadows of secrets left unspoken. The galaxy burned, from the outer rim to the core, of fires of rebellion spread like a plague of stars. World after world, once sworn to the Imperium, now raised banners of treachery. Space Marines who had once fought side by side turned their bolters upon one another. Planets became pyres, fleets became graveyards, and the dream of unity, already fragile, collapsed beneath the weight of betrayal. At the center of this storm stood Horus, once the brightest of the Primarchs, the beloved son, the Warmaster whose name had been spoken with reverence across the stars. Now he was the arch traitor, armored in black and gold, his eyes lit by the sickly glow of the warp. The whispers that had filled the void of his father's silence now roared like a tempest. They called him Liberator, Emperor to be, God in waiting, and Horus listened. Not because he was weak, but because the words of chaos offered what his father would not. Certainty, belonging, and a destiny of his own making. The siege of Terra began like a nightmare given form. The sky of humanity's cradle darkened beneath the arrival of traitor fleets. Battle barges and planet killers blotted out the sun, their hulls adorned with sigils of the dark gods. Legions of corrupted Astartes descended upon the palace walls. Demons howled in the warp as reality itself trembled. The great defenses of the Imperial Palace walls layered with void shields and adamantium, fortresses raised by the genius of Roble Dorn shuddered under relentless assault. Every cost thousands of lives, every breach filled with the blood of loyalists who refused. Inside the palace, the Emperor remained silent. He issued commands through his generals, guiding the defense with cold efficiency, but he spoke no words of comfort to the sons who still fought for him. Sanguinius, Dorn, Malcador all felt the weight of that silence even as they bled to hold the line. They did not question his strategy, they dared not, yet in the secret chambers of their hearts, the old ache remained. Why would their father not speak? Not even now, when the galaxy teetered on the edge of extinction. Meanwhile Horus, aboard the mighty battleship Vengeful Spirit, prepared the final gambit. The Warmaster knew that victory could not come through brute force alone. Time was against him. The Loyalists, bloodied, fought with unyielding fury. If the Emperor could hold Terra long enough, reinforcements from scattered Loyalist fleets might break the siege. And so Horus made a choice as audacious as it was dangerous. He lowered the shields of his flagship, inviting his father to strike. It was a trap, but also a challenge. A silent message passed across the void. Come to me, Father, and this yourself, if you dare. Some say Horus lowered those shields out of pride, eager to prove himself in final combat. Others believe he sought, in some hidden corner of his soul, one last chance for recognition. Perhaps he hoped that, in the crucible of battle, the Emperor would finally speak to him not as Warmaster or traitor, but as son. The Emperor accepted, gathering his chosen sanguineous, Dorn, and a handful of his mightiest warriors. He prepared to teleport aboard the vengeful spirit. The time for silence was ending, but what words would be spoken upon that cursed ship would decide the fate of the galaxy and reveal whether silence had been strategy or fatal flaw all along. The teleportation strike scattered them. What should have been a precise assault upon the heart of the vengeful spirit instead dissolved into chaos. The ship was no longer a vessel of steel and engines, it was a cathedral of corruption. Corridors stretched and bent into impossible angles, their walls pulsing like flesh. Sigils of the dark gods burned across bulkheads, weeping ichor. The air itself shimmered with whispers, each word a lure, a poison, a dagger aimed at the soul. The loyalists who materialized aboard found themselves separated, scattered across the labyrinth. Some faced hordes of twisted Astartes, their armor warped by the touch of the warp into grotesque parodies of their former selves. Others fought demons that stalked the corridors, shadows with claws and maws that split reality as they struck. Every step forward was a battle, every breath a prayer. Among them, Sanguinius walked alone. The angel of Baal, wings spread wide, his golden armor radiant even amid the filth of chaos. He moved with purpose, his path seemingly drawn by destiny itself. Some say he sought Horus knowingly, understanding that his fate was already sealed. Others claim the currents of the warp guided him, pulling him inexorably toward the Warmaster's throne chamber. There, in that chamber, he found Horus. No longer the brother he had known, but a giant clad in armor blacker than night, marked with the sigils of the ruinous powers. Warmaster's gaze burned with hate, bide, and something deeper anguish unspoken, as if buried beneath layers of rage. Between them stretched a silence heavier than any battlefield. Then steel met steel. The clash of their blades rang out like thunder, echoing through the twisted corridors of the ship. Sanguinius fought not for victory, but for hope, for one last chance to slow the traitor, to weaken him before the Emperor arrived. His blows were swift as lightning, his wings carrying him aloft in graceful arcs. But Horus was no longer merely mortal. The dark gods had filled him with their strength, each strike of his weapon carrying the weight of worlds. The battle was desperate, beautiful, tragic. For a moment, it seemed the angel might stand against the Warmaster, his courage blazing against the tide of corruption. That destiny would not be so kind. Horus struck, and the chamber trembled. The blade cut through armor, through flesh, through bone. Sanguinius fell. Legends say he foresaw his death long before moment, and yet embraced it willingly. Some whisper that, in his final breath, he glimpsed the Emperor's triumph, a vision that steadied his hand even as life left his body. Others claim that, with his dying strike, he marked Horus, wounding him in a way that would later matter when the emperor faced his son. Whatever the truth, his sacrifice was undeniable. The angel died so that others might still have a chance to prevail. When the emperor finally reached the throne chamber, he found not only Horus awaiting him, but the broken body of his most beloved son. The silence that passed in that instant was not strategy nor flaw. It was grief, raw and uncontainable, echoing in the vast abyss of the ship. And in that grief, the final confrontation began. The emperor and Horus, father and son, god and betrayer, locked in a battle that would decide the fate of mankind. The chair shook as two titans met. The emperor stepped forward, his golden armor radiant even in the corrupted dark, his blade a weapon of light and annihilation gleaming with the fury of Terra itself. Horus, vast and terrible, stood clad in armor inscribed with the runes of the dark gods, each symbol burning with infernal promise. It was not simply a duel. It was the clash of gods, the collision of destiny. Their weapons struck, and reality bent. Each blow shattered the walls of the chamber, tearing rents into the warp. Demons shrieked in delight as raw power flared, their laughter echoing through dimensions. Bolts of psychic lightning ripped across the battlefield, tearing through steel and stone, leaving nothing but ash. The ship itself groaned as though it could not contain the fury unleashed within it. But it was not merely strength that was tested. The battle was a war of souls. Horus's voice rang out between strikes, words as deadly as his blade, accusations, truths twisted by bitterness, wounds opened and left to bleed. He condemned the emperor's lies, the silence, the deception of the Primarchs. You made us tools, not sons. You sought not to love us, but to use us, to discard us when we had served your purpose. The emperor answered not with denial, but with grief. His silence spoke of wounds deeper than steel could cut. Every parry, every counterstroke was not only defense but sorrow, the agony of a father forced to strike down the child he once loved most. Yet his eyes, unyielding, carried a truth no words could express. There was no choice. Horus had fallen too far. The duel stretched beyond time. Each movement was both physical and cosmic, as though the very fate of mankind shifted with every strike. The emperor struck, and galaxies trembled. Horus countered, and the veil between reality and the warp grew thinner, more fragile. This was no longer battle but apocalypse, fought in the heart of a dying ship, witnessed by demons, echoes, and the broken spirit of the angel lying slain nearby. And still, for all his power, the emperor held back. In the depth of his being, he hesitated. For all Horus had become, he was still his son, the child he had raised, the war master he had trusted above all others. The emperor's strikes bore weight, but not finality. He sought to save, to redeem, even when redemption was ashes. The dark gods saw the hesitation and laughed. They filled Horus with greater power, his blows raining down like the fury of the warp itself. He drove the emperor to his knees, armor cracked, golden light flickering beneath the shadow of chaos. And in that moment, the War Master stood triumphant not only in body, but in spirit. His voice rose above the storm. See, Father, you are not a god, you are weakness clothed in gold. Your silence has damned us all. The Emperor looked up, his eyes filled not with fear, but with sorrow deeper than eternity. And in that sorrow, the fire of decision was born. He could no longer hold back. The time for mercy had ended. The fate of humanity demanded sacrifice not only of sons, but of a father's heart itself. The next strike would not be hesitation. It would be the end. The chamber was silent for a heartbeat. The kind of silence that comes before the storm, heavy with inevitability. The Emperor rose from his knees, light gathering around him, golden radiance burning away the shadows. Where mercy had once stayed his hand, resolve now replaced it. The time for hesitation is over. Horus sensed the change. The War Master snarled, his form swelling with the gifts of the dark gods, flesh twisting, eyes burning with warp fire. He rushed forward, his blade raised high, every strike a chorus of chaos. The dark gods screamed through him, their voices merging with his own, a cacophony of hate, triumph, and corruption. The Emperor met him. Their weapons collided once more, but this time the light of Terra blazed brighter than the darkness. Each swing of the Emperor's blade cleaved through not only armor, but the very essence of chaos. Demons shrieked as their patron's power faltered, their forms unraveling into dust. For the first time, Horus faltered. Still, he fought on, laughter spilling from his lips, laughter tinged with desperation. Even now, Father, you cannot deny what you are. A tyrant who hides truth behind silence. A jailer who would shackle mankind in your name. His words echoed through the chamber, yet there was doubt in them, as if he sought to convince himself as much as the Emperor. The Emperor did not answer with words. He answered with truth not spoken, but unleashed. A psychic storm erupted, light pouring from his very being. Visions of humanity's future blazed across the warp. The survival of billions, the endurance of the Imperium, the dream of a species that might one day escape the jaws of chaos. It was a vision so pure, so absolute, that even the dark gods recoiled. Horus staggered. For a fleeting instant, the War Master's eyes cleared. Beneath the corruption, beneath the fury, there was recognition, pain, sorrow, love long buried. And then, in the next instant, it was gone. The dark gods reasserted their hold, twisting his form into monstrosity. He raised his weapon for the final strike. The Emperor struck first. The blow was absolute, fueled by every ounce of his power, his sorrow, his love, and his rage. Golden light engulfed Horus, burning away the gifts of the dark gods, stripping him down to nothing but ash and memory. The War Master screamed not in defiance, but in release. And then he was gone, utterly annihilated, body and soul erased from existence. But victory bore a cost. The Emperor had unleashed his full power, and in doing so, torn himself apart. The energy of the warp had ravaged his mortal frame, leaving him broken, dying, armor shattered, flesh scorched, his light flickered like a candle, and yet he stood victorious, gazing upon the place where his son had perished, silent tears falling unseen. It was then that the loyalists reached him, Robel Dorn, broken with grief, finding not a god triumphant, but a father ruined. They carried him from the chamber, past the fallen body of Sanguinius, past the shattered remnants of a dream. And as the vengeful spirit fell silent, the fate of mankind changed forever. The Emperor was placed upon the golden throne, not as ruler triumphant, but as a prisoner of eternity. A god in chains, bound by his own sacrifice, sustaining the Imperium at the cost of his own voice, his own freedom. The galaxy was saved, but the price was silence everlasting. Thus ended the heresy. Thus began the long night of the Imperium. And thus was born the greatest question of all. Had the Emperor won, or had he lost everything? The galaxy fell silent in the wake of Horus's death. Not silent in the sense of peace, for war still raged across countless systems, but in the sense of a breath held, a storm paused, the echo of something too vast to comprehend. The War Master, chosen of the Emperor, brightest of the Primarchs, heir to the Great Crusade, was gone, erased not only in body, but in soul. No trace remained, no echo, no chance of resurrection. Where once there had been a son, a leader, a brother, now there was only ash. Yet victory brought no triumph. Upon the twisted decks of the vengeful spirit, Roble Dorn found not the radiant emperor he had known, but a broken husk of divine flesh. The master of mankind, the one whose will had bent empires, whose hand had shaped the destiny of humanity itself, lay shattered beyond repair. His golden armor was torn open, his body consumed by the fire's psychic warfare, his breath shallow, each exhale more fragile than the last, and worst of all, his voice, once the voice that commanded Primarchs and worlds alike, was gone. The Emperor was silent. Orn wept. For a moment, the stoic Praetorian, unbending in duty, immovable in siege, was nothing more than a son kneeling beside his dying father. The burden of command pressed upon him at once. He must save what could be saved, preserve what could be preserved. He gathered the Emperor's body, lifting him with reverence, and bore him back through the haunted ship. Around him lay devastation, corridors strewn with corpses, demons dissolving into ether, echoes of the angel's final stand. Sanguinius was gone, too, his noble sacrifice immortalized in death. Horus slain, Sanguinius fallen, the Emperor dying. The cost of victory was unbearable. When they returned to Terra, the sky was still black with smoke. The siege of the Imperial Palace had left scars that would never heal. The walls were shattered, the plazas burned, the halls of the palace filled with the dead of both loyalist and traitor. Billions had perished, and billions more lay broken in body and spirit. The throne world, jewel of humanity, was a graveyard. Yet none of this mattered when they entered the Sanctum Imperialis. There, amidst the rubble and ruin, a decision was made that would define the next 10,000 years. Malcador the Sigillite, who had burned his own soul to hold the Golden Throne during the Webway catastrophe, was gone. Only the husk of that throne remained, half broken, its circuits flickering with unstable power, its mechanisms groaning with the weight of ages. And yet it was the only vessel left that might preserve the Emperor's life. The Mechanicum priests whispered among themselves, their voices filled with awe and dread. To bind the Emperor to the throne was to imprison him, to chain a god within a machine. But to do otherwise was unthinkable, for without him, the astronomic and the psychic beacon that guided ships across the warp would fade, and humanity would be lost to the tides of chaos. The Imperium, so newly forged, so freshly scarred, would die in its cradle. And so, with trembling hands and iron resolve, they carried the Emperor to the throne. His body was lowered into its seat, golden against golden, his flesh fusing with the machinery, his essence merging with its circuits. The priests chanted litanies of activation, their voices breaking as they realized what they were doing, not saving a man, but entombing. Dorn watched in silence, his face carved of stone, yet his eyes aflame with grief. The throne roared to life. Its engines screamed, its conduits blazed with energy, its runes burned brighter than ever before. And through it all, the Emperor remained still, his eyes closed, his lips unmoving, his body lifeless save for the faint glow of his power coursing through the machine. The throne drank his essence, binding him to itself, making him eternal and forever silent. Thus the Imperium was saved. Thus the Emperor endured. But what had been preserved was not life. It was something else, something darker, something more terrible. A prison of gold and fire, a god in chains. The Loyalists proclaimed victory, for the War Master was no more. The traitors fled, broken and scattered, the legions of chaos cast into the warp. But those who stood in the palace, who had seen the Emperor's broken form upon the throne, knew the truth. The Imperium had not won, it had survived, and survival had come at the cost of its heart. From that day forth, the Emperor was no longer a ruler. He was no longer a general, no longer a father, no longer a voice that could be heard. He was an icon, a light, a presence sustained by sacrifice. The golden throne became both his seat and his tomb, the place where the master of mankind would remain, motionless, voiceless, for all the millennia to come. And in echo of that silence, the Imperium changed forever. When the Emperor was bound to the golden throne, the Imperium believed it had preserved his will. In truth, what was preserved was his light. The astronomical beacon of humanity blazed across the warp like a lighthouse against an endless night. Without it, the void would have devoured mankind's fleets, scattering them into madness, leaving them to be consumed by demons. With it, humanity endured, its ships guided through storms of unreality by a flame that burned brighter than any star. But that flame demanded fuel. The priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, those who had fused the Emperor's broken essence to the machine, soon discovered the terrible truth. The throne was not self-sustaining. It devoured seekers, feeding on their life force, their souls, their every spark of being. Without such sacrifice, the throne would sputter and die, and the Emperor's light with it. And so, across the Imperium, the black ships began their endless voyages. From every world, from hive cities of billions to forgotten colonies clinging to survival, seekers were taken. Some willingly, seeing it as service to the master of mankind. Most unwillingly, torn from their families, their lives erased in the name of duty. The black ships became symbols of dread, their arrival heralded by whispers and fear. For when they departed, thousands were gone, and only ashes remained. Upon Terra, within the Sanctum Astronomicon, the Mosensekers were gathered, rows upon rows of the condemned, their eyes hollow, their bodies trembling. Some prayed, some screamed, most simply wept, and one by one, they were cast into the fire of the throne, their souls consumed, their bodies withering to husks in moments. 10,000 lives each day, 10,000 deaths to keep the light alive. It became a ritual, a sacrifice that defined the Imperium. Every world knew it. Every citizen understood it, even if they dared not speak of it. The Emperor lived, but only because his children died unceasingly. The Imperium endured, but at a cost so vast it could never truly be measured. The Ecclesiarchy called it holy. They spoke of the seekers as martyrs, their souls carried by the Emperor's grace into eternal reward. They sang hymns of sacrifice, turning horror into sanctity, blood into ritual. But beneath the hymns, beneath the incense and gold, the truth remained unchanged. The golden throne was not a miracle. It was a furnace, a cage that devoured human lives so that the Imperium might crawl another day through the shadows of the galaxy. And what of the Emperor himself? Some whispered that his soul fed upon the Sekers, that their essence flowed into him, keeping his divine fire alive. Others feared something darker, that he did not want this, that his body was stained against his will, chained to a destiny he had never chosen. God in chains, the Inquisitors called him in Forbidden Circle. Not a savior enthroned, but a prisoner, bound by the very mechanisms built to preserve him. The Mechanicus maintained the throne, its priests treating it as the holiest of relics. That even they knew its truth. It was failing. Each year, its systems grew more unstable. Each century, more Sekers were demanded. The Emperor's light still blazed, but it flickered, strained by the weight of eternity. And the Imperium, blinded by faith, refused to admit it. For the common citizen, the truth was hidden behind layers of dogma. They believed the Emperor eternal, his will undiminished, his gaze upon them always. They did not see the cost, the endless procession of Sekers fed into the throne. But for those who served in the Astronomicon, who walked its halls and heard the screams, the truth was inescapable. They lived daily with the sound of souls being torn asunder, with the knowledge that their Emperor's survival was written in blood. It was a truth too heavy for most to bear. Some went mad, some turned heretic, whispering that the Emperor was not alive at all, that the throne devoured the Sekers not to preserve him, but to feed the machine itself. The Inquisition burned such voices swiftly, but the questions lingered. Was the Emperor still conscious? Did he know what was done in his name? Or was he a corpse, sustained by ritual sacrifice, his essence long since consumed? That whether god or corpse, the result was the same. The Astronomicon burned, and with it the Imperium endured. Worlds were conquered, wars were fought, and humanity spread once more among the stars. But always, in the shadows of victory, there was the sound of dying Sekers, the tolling of the greatest price ever paid. And so the Golden Throne became more than a seat. It became a symbol. To the faithful, it was the proof of the Emperor's divinity, his eternal guardianship. To the doubters, it was a coffin, a reminder that humanity's survival rested not on triumph, but on chains of fire and blood. And to those who dared whisper the forbidden truth, it was both salvation and damnation, forever entwined. The Imperium had survived Horus, but in surviving, it had forged its greatest paradox, a god enthroned, yet silent, a light that guided the galaxy, but burned only because countless lives were extinguished each day. The Emperor lived, and yet, in truth, he had never been more dead. The Golden Throne was not merely a machine. It was a cage, not of iron or steel, but of psychic energy, of flesh fused to metal, of divine will bound by ritual and runes. And within that cage, the Emperor sat silent, motionless, eternal. That to call him alive would be misleading. He was more than life, yet less than a living being. For 10,000 years, the throne has consumed Sekers thousands, then tens of thousands, each day to sustain a single existence. It is a paradox of survival. Humanity endures only because the Emperor is bound, yet the Emperor endures only because humanity dies. Priests chant his litanies as the seekers scream, believing the cries to be prayers or whispers of sanctity. Yet in secret, many Mechanicus priests call it what it truly is, a crucifixion without end. This is the hidden truth of the Imperium. A god enthroned, yet silent, a ruler whose will cannot be heard, whose love and guidance are denied to those he created. A master of mankind whose hands are bound, whose voice is forever stilled, whose soul is fused to circuits that keep him alive but unfree. Legends speak of whispers in forbidden corners. Some believe the Emperor suffers still, that he remembers the Great Crusade, the betrayal of Horus, the deaths of his sons, that he feels each day the weight of the billions who serve, fight, and die, their lives feeding his continued existence. Others believe he has long since withdrawn into himself, his mind a labyrinth of fire and shadow, unreachable even to the most faithful. Perhaps he exists only as will, as energy, as the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon. Perhaps he is a god in name alone, a corpse animated by ritual and devotion. The consequences of such a truth are vast. If the people knew, if the billions of souls across the Imperium understood that their survival rested on a prison of their god, the consequences would be unimaginable. Faith would shatter. The Emperor's divinity would be questioned. The Imperium itself might collapse, for it is built not on reason, but on belief in the eternal, in the infallible, in the Savior who washes over them even in silence. Even among the highest echelons of the Imperium, only a few glimpse the truth. The High Lords of Terror rule in his stead, yet all are acutely aware that their authority rests upon a single fragile fulcrum, the continued function of the throne. A malfunction, a failure, a single lapse could kill the Emperor and extinguish the Astronomicon, leaving mankind adrift in the warp, its fleets lost, its worlds vulnerable. It is a fear that shapes every decision, every strategy, every decree issued from the Golden Throne. They govern not merely for the present, but to prolong the life of a silent god. The Inquisition whispers of cults that know fragments of the secret societies that believe the Emperor is no longer divine, only a prisoner. Some claim that he will awaken one day, no longer bound, to reshape humanity according to his vision. Others fear that his awakening is impossible, that the chains of the throne have twisted his mind beyond repair. These groups are hunted, their teachings heresy, yet the questions linger. What does it mean to worship a God who cannot speak? Can humanity continue to endure knowing the sacrifice required to sustain him? The Golden Throne itself has become a symbol of paradox. To some, it is ultimate salvation. To others, it is the ultimate horror. Its very existence is both the heart of the Imperium and the source of its darkest secret. Its operation requires daily death, its survival demands unquestioned obedience, and its continued function is ensured by silence, a silence that speaks louder than any word. And yet, despite all this, the Imperium endures. The Astronomicon guides the fleets, seekers are sacrificed, worlds are united under the banner of the Emperor. Humanity marches on, its faith undiminished, its belief in salvation unwavering, all because one being, bound in golden chains, remains alive though not free, though not whole, though not speaking. The Emperor is God, yet prisoner. master of all, yet confined, the savior of humanity, yet dependent upon its endless sacrifices. In this paradox lies the ultimate cost of immortality. Not the victory over Horus, not the survival of worlds, not even the triumph of the crusade. Those were but fleeting triumphs. The true price is eternal vigil. It is the endless procession of seekers, the whispers of cults, the fear in the hearts of the High Lords, and the silent suffering of a god bound to sustain a galaxy, a god in chains. And thus, the Imperium marches on, guided by a silent beacon, sustained by sacrifice, and ruled by a god whose voice can never be heard again. 10,000 years have passed. Time, as it exists for mortals, has little meaning within the shadow of the golden throne. The Emperor remains silent, immobile, bound by a fusion of flesh, metal, and ritual. Yet the galaxy continues to turn, worlds rise and fall, and humanity endures. The Imperium marches forward, guided by the Astronomicon, sustained by sacrifices that span millennia. And in every corner of its vast expanse, his legacy is felt not in words or deeds, but in the unyielding force of survival. The High Lords of Terra govern in his stead, wielding authority granted not by free will, but by the continued existence of the Emperor. They make decisions that shape billions of lives, weigh the fates of planets, and direct the course of war across countless systems. Each action, each decree, is a balancing act upon the fragile thread of the throne's life. One misstep, one neglected detail, could snuff out the Emperor's flame and plunge the galaxy into darkness. And yet, the Imperium endures, blind to the cost and faithful to a deity who can no longer speak. The seekers continue to die. Every day, the black ships arrive, collecting the gifted and the unwilling, fueling the Astronomicon with their life force. Each death is mourned by none but the few who understand the machinery of survival. Families are left grieving, entire worlds accept the sacrifice as necessity, and yet questions remain whispered in the shadows. Does the Emperor know? Does he care? Or is he simply a machine now, burning eternally for a galaxy that will never hear his voice again? And still, there are those who dare to look deeper. Secret cults, scattered across the Imperium, preserve fragments of forbidden knowledge. They speak of the Emperor not as an omnipotent god, but as a prisoner, bound by chains of golden light. Some revere him still, believing that his awakening will reshape humanity. Others fear the truth, that he has been consumed by the throne, his mind no longer free, his soul a candle flickering in the machinery of eternity. These cults are dangerous, heretical, hunted by the Inquisition, yet their whispers persist. For even 10,000 years cannot erase the questions. What is the true nature of the master of mankind? And what will happen when the throne finally falters? Across the Imperium, the legacy of the Emperor's sacrifice manifests in both light and shadow. Humanity thrives, yet the cost is staggering. Billions dead, trillions living under a regime where faith eclipses freedom, where obedience is demanded in the name of survival. The Emperor's dream of a united humanity continues, yet it is a dream maintained through fear, ritual, and the unceasing vigilance of his servants. And the galaxy washes, unaware, as a silent god endures in golden chains, the line between salvation and tyranny blurred beyond recognition. It is a paradox of eternity. the Emperor's death would end the Imperium. That his life, bound in the throne, perpetuates suffering on an unimaginable scale. The galaxy survives, but at a cost that few comprehend. And within the silent core of Terra, a single truth remains unspoken, known only to the few who have glimpsed the machinery of gods, that immortality is never free, and that even divinity demands a price. Thus the Imperium marches on, faith binds the masses, sacrifice sustains the light, and the Emperor endures, silent and eternal. He is master, savior, prisoner, and God all at once, and in his chains lies the shadow of all that humanity has achieved, and all it has yet to endure. The golden throne burns with unceasing fire. The Astronomicon shines across the warp. Seekers die in ritual devotion, and the Emperor, silent, washes nothing, speaks nothing, yet sustains everything. This is the legacy of the broken God. This is the cost of immortality. This is the foundation upon which the Imperium rests, and the darkness that hides the Emperor's most forbidden truth. And so, as millennia pass and the galaxy continues to fight, the next questions arise, those that cannot be spoken in the light of Terra, whispered only in secret. Are there cults that know more than the High Lords admit? Do some among humanity understand the full scope of the throne's burden? And if the Emperor ever awakens or fails, what will become of all who depend upon him? The answers remain hidden, for the Emperor's secret is eternal, and the Imperium marches on into shadow, into fire, into silence. Even after 10,000 years of silence, whispers of the Emperor's true nature persisted. Not in the grand halls of Terra, not in the liturgical hymns of the ecclesiarchy, but in the shadows, in hidden sanctuaries, and among secret brotherhoods scattered across the galaxy. These were the custodians of forbidden knowledge, the keepers of truths that could unravel the very fabric of faith. They called themselves many things: the silent choir, the custodes arcani, or, more rarely, simply the washers. To most, they were myths. To the faithful inquisitors, they were heresy incarnate. To themselves, they were guardians. Their origin traced back to the earliest days after the Horus Heresy, while the Imperium rebuilt under the guidance of the High Lords and Mechanicus. These secret societies quietly formed. Some emerged from remnants of the original custodes, sworn not only to protect the Emperor, but to safeguard the knowledge of his true condition. Others were composed of inquisitors and loyalist seekers who had glimpsed fragments of the Emperor's suffering within the throne. They understood that the throne was not merely a device, but a prison, a golden cage that required unending sacrifice. Within hidden chambers beneath Terra, the custodians performed rituals of observation and preservation. They recorded the smallest fluctuations in the Astronomicon, noting changes in the Emperor's psychic presence, and tracked the flow of seeker souls into the throne. They documented these events not for worship, but for understanding, seeking patterns, trying to predict the consequences of the Emperor's confinement over millennia. These texts, etched into crystalline tablets and stored within the deepest vaults of Terra, were forbidden. Their knowledge was considered heretical by the ecclesiarchy and dangerous by the Mechanicus. That without these records, the history of the Emperor's last battles, his transformation into a god in chains, would be lost. The custodians understood a paradox that none dared speak aloud. The Imperium's survival depended on a secret too terrible. If the masses discovered the full truth that the Emperor did not speak, that he was sustained by death, that his sacrifice demanded endless souls, the faith that bound billions would shatter. Worlds would rise in rebellion, fleets would falter in the warp, and the galaxy could descend into chaos anew. Even the High Lords of Terra did not fully grasp this calculus. Their decisions were guided by protocol and faith, not by understanding of the throne's true burden. Yet the custodians carried their knowledge silently. They met in hidden sanctuaries, sharing intelligence on Sacer quotas, anomalies in the Astronomicon, and the occasional visions of the Emperor that escaped through the throne. They debated endlessly. Should this knowledge be safeguarded indefinitely, or was there a time when humanity must know? Some argued that revelation was inevitable, that the Emperor's awakening or failure would one day expose all truths. Others warned that even a hint of disclosure could bring ruin. Among these hidden custodians, there existed factions. Some were devoted to preserving the Emperor as a deity, carefully crafting narratives to maintain the faith of billions. They viewed the throne as sacred, the sacrifices necessary, and humanity's ignorance as a blessing. Others saw the Emperor as a victim, a god imprisoned by his own designs, and humanity as a species chained to the consequences of his suffering. These ideological schisms sometimes erupted into clandestine conflict, rivalries that spanned centuries and crossed the galaxy. But all agreed on one principle: the Emperor's secret must survive. Legends whisper of individuals who glimpsed fragments of the Emperor's mind while interfacing with a throne. Some Sacers reported visions of endless corridors filled with burning souls, golden light stretching into infinity, and the faint echo of a voice that could not speak. These visions were rare, dangerous, and often fatal. Those who survived were sometimes recruited into the custodians' ranks, sworn to secrecy, trained to read the subtle signs of the throne's fluctuations, and taught to navigate the perilous politics of Terra's hidden hierarchy. The custodians also monitored the black ships and the flow of Sacers, noting deviations, shortages, or anomalies that might threaten the Emperor's continued existence. They maintained records of every soul offered, every ritual performed, and every minute variation in the Astronomicon's output. To most of humanity, these ships were instruments of fear. To the custodians, they were lifelines, fragile threads keeping the galaxy from plunging into darkness. Despite their vigilance, the custodians understood that their work was temporary. The Emperor's secret was eternal, and the galaxy was vast. No matter how diligent, they could not control the thousands of worlds, the countless Sacers, or the inexorable march of time. Their task was not to wield power, but to watch, to record, and to ensure that when the day of revelation arrived, the Imperium might endure it, or that humanity might never know it all. In silence, in shadow, in hidden sanctuaries where no one else could tread, the Emperor's secret lived on. The custodians were its guardians, its chroniclers, and its most devoted protectors. They carried the burden of forbidden knowledge, aware that every revelation carried a price, yet understanding that some truths were too dangerous to remain unspoken. And so, across Terra and beyond, the secret cults persisted. Hidden in plain sight, their influence subtle, their existence denied. They whispered of a god who could not speak, of sacrifices made in his name, and of a future in which the Imperium's greatest truth would never be revealed. They were the Emperor's secret custodians, and in their shadows, his forbidden truths endured, awaiting the day when the galaxy might either awaken or collapse under the weight of what it could never know. Across the Imperium, whispers of the Emperor's hidden nature were never fully silenced. They persisted in hushed conversations, in coded messages, and in the practices of clandestine societies scattered from Terra to the outermost colonies. These were the cults that dared to ask questions no one else. They dared to speak of truths the Imperium officially denied, truths that could unrival the faith of billions if revealed. The most well-known of these secret cults were scattered, loosely organized, yet united by a singular belief. The Emperor was more than a god in chains. They claimed he was evolving, transforming, and that his silent suffering was but precursor to an eventual apotheosis, a moment when he would transcend the throne and return in a form no mortal could fully comprehend. This belief was heresy in the eyes of the ecclesiarchy, but to the cultists, it was salvation. They called this transformation the Ascension, the day the Emperor would finally walk among his children, not as a silent icon, but as a living, active God. Different cults interpreted the Ascension differently. Some saw it as a literal return of the Emperor to the material realm, an event that would renew the Imperium and purge it of corruption. Others believed it was a psychic rebirth, his consciousness merging with the Astronomicon to guide humanity on an entirely new path. A few, more radical and dangerous, envisioned him returning as a figure of wrath, reshaping mankind with a power and judgment unbound by morality. These secret cults often operated in isolation, communicating through hidden networks and coded manuscripts. They worshipped the Emperor not only as divine, but as a figure of mystery and ultimate potential. They preserved forbidden texts describing the Great Crusade, the Horus Heresy, and glimpses of the Golden Throne's operation, always careful to balance revelation with secrecy. Their rituals were complex, often involving meditations, psychic exercises, and simulated interactions with the Emperor's light as perceived through visions of the Astronomicon. They sought communion not with the voice, but with a presence. That alongside their devotion was unease. Every cultist knew the cost of the throne's operation. They knew of the thousands of seekers consumed each day to sustain the Emperor. They understood, at least in part, that the god they venerated was bound by mechanisms that demanded sacrifice beyond comprehension. This created a tension at the heart of the cults. Worshipping the Emperor as a divine, benevolent figure while accepting horrifying reality of the throne. Some cults tried to reinterpret the deaths of seekers as holy offerings, a necessary balance to maintain the galaxy's survival. Others shunned this logic, teaching that the Imperium's leadership was blind to the cruelty of the system, and that the Emperor himself might one day need liberation. The Inquisition viewed all such beliefs as heretical, particularly the notion that the Emperor's eventual ascension was imminent. Agents of the Ordo Hereticus hunted cults relentlessly, eradicating temples, destroying texts, and interrogating leaders with unspeakable devices. Yet despite decades and centuries of purges, new cults always emerge. They were patient, cunning, and adaptable, embedding themselves in remote colonies, aboard ships, and within secretive mechanicus enclaves. The knowledge of the Emperor's chained divinity persisted because the human mind, when confronted with silence and mystery, always seeks explanation. The cults also developed their own hierarchies, often mirroring the Imperium's structure but in miniature. At the highest levels were the illuminated, those who had meditated directly upon visions of the Emperor's psychic essence. They interpreted fluctuations in the astronomicon, reading the subtlest signs in its light and shadows as messages from the throne. Below them were the seers, trained to observe patterns in Seker activity, tracking anomalies in black ship arrivals, and maintaining records of deaths and rituals. The common members were the faithful, often unaware of the full scope of the Emperor's condition but devoted to their interpretation of his eventual return. Despite the secrecy, the cults had influence beyond their hidden networks. Their teachings, though forbidden, occasionally filtered into popular belief through myths, parables, and local traditions. Some hive worlds reported strange festivals where children were honored as bearers of the Emperor's light, unknowingly echoing the cult's psychic symbolism. Other worlds held clandestine ceremonies simulating the Emperor's awakening, reinforcing hope and fear in equal measure. Even the High Lords, unaware of the cult's exact nature, occasionally remarked on unexplained surges of loyalty or sudden bursts of psychic activity in distant sectors. The tension between secrecy and devotion defined the Emperor's secret cults. They existed in a paradox, preserving faith while acknowledging horrors, worshipping a silent God while understanding his suffering, anticipating a glorious return while concealing truths too terrible. And in this delicate balance, they ensured that the Emperor's forbidden truths, his chained divinity, his endless sacrifices, and his potential for apotheoses would endure for millennia, safe from the unprepared eyes of humanity. Some custodians warned that the day would come when the throne might falter, or the Emperor might awaken in ways none could anticipate. They debated whether humanity would survive such a revelation, or whether the galaxy would collapse under the weight of truths it was never meant to bear. Yet for now, the cults endured, guardians of a forbidden knowledge, preserving the paradox at the heart of the Imperium, a God who lives, yet is chained, a savior who washes, yet cannot speak, a master whose silence shapes the fate of billions. And so the Emperor's secret continues to live, hidden in shadows, protected by the devout, feared by the Inquisition, and whispered only in the dead of night to those who dare ask questions that the Imperium cannot answer. The Emperor's secret was a fragile thing. It existed in whispers, in hidden texts, in the rituals of cults that dared to peer beyond the official narratives of the Imperium. That every secret has its risks. Every hidden truth carries the potential for chaos. For the custodians and cultists alike, the greatest danger was not the heretical inquisitors, nor the threats of chaos but revelation itself. To reveal the full scope of the Emperor's condition would shake the foundations of the Imperium. Billions of souls, united by faith in a living God, would learn that their savior was bound, silent, and dependent upon the sacrifice of countless Sekers to endure. Worlds would question obedience. Fleets could falter in the warp without the astronomicon, leaving humanity vulnerable to demons and marauding enemies. Faith, the very glue of the Imperium, might crumble in an instant. Within the cults, debates raged over the timing and method of disclosure. Some argued for careful preparation, educating the masses slowly through myth and allegory, shaping understanding over centuries. Others demanded secrecy at all costs, warning that even a hint of the truth could spark rebellion, heresy, and the collapse of entire sectors. Tensions between these factions sometimes erupted into conflict, covert assassinations, sabotage of rituals, and subtle misinformation campaign. Even among those devoted to the emperor, the question remained, who had the authority to judge when humanity could know? The custodians understood another danger, the perception of the emperor himself. Any revelation might shift how humans conceptualized him, from omnipotent, eternal savior to prisoner, victim, or even automaton. Faith could turn to despair, worship to resentment. And if despair spread, it could weaken the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon, causing widespread navigational failures across the Imperium. Ships might become lost in the warp, entire sectors isolated, and the survival of mankind imperiled. It was this tension that gave the secret cults both power and peril. They existed in a delicate balance, operating in shadows, carefully interpreting fragments of forbidden knowledge while shielding humanity from truths too vast to comprehend. Yet the very act of preserving these truths ensured constant vigilance. A single slip, a miswritten text, an overheard conversation, a psychic echo could unravel centuries of careful secrecy. And the consequences would be immediate, violent, and irreversible. Some of the cults developed extreme measures to protect the secret. Elite enforcers, sometimes called silent sentinels, were trained to infiltrate rival factions, eliminate potential leaks, and purge heretical knowledge that threatened to spread. These sentinels operated without question, enforcing secrecy with ruthless efficiency. To them, the ends justified the means. The Emperor's survival and the Imperium's continuity outweighed individual lives, moral quandaries, or even loyalty to local authorities. The Inquisition, ever vigilant, unknowingly reinforced the cult's secrecy. Their purges and investigations created an environment of fear, driving forbidden knowledge further underground. Ironically, the very threat of discovery ensured that secrets were better preserved. Cults adapted, migrating to isolated sectors, encrypting their texts, and communicating through psychic resonance or coded networks. Their survival was as much a testament to ingenuity as it was to devotion. That even within the cults, cracks form. Ideological divisions widen. Some members feared that the Imperium could never endure the revelation of the Emperor's chained divinity. Others argued that humanity had a right to know the truth, that faith built on ignorance was fragile and ultimately meaningless. These schisms created tension, betrayal, and sometimes bloodshed within the cults themselves. And through it all, the Emperor remained silent, a god in chains, unaware or indifferent to the turmoil he inspired. The cults also faced an external threat, the force of chaos. Demons and traitor agents were aware of the Emperor's imprisonment, and many sought to exploit the secret for their own gain. A revelation of weakness could embolden them, turning loyalist worlds against one another and weakening humanity's position in the galaxy. For the cults, guarding the Emperor's secret was not merely a religious duty, it was a strategic necessity, a shield against the predators of the warp. and so the balance persisted. The Emperor's secret remained hidden in the shadows. Cults worked tirelessly to preserve it, despite ideological rifts, external threats, and the sheer weight of the knowledge they bore. They acted as custodians of truth, knowing that revelation could destroy everything, yet understanding that concealment carried its own moral burden. In the end, the peril of revelation was eternal. The Emperor remained bound to the Golden Throne. The Astronomican burned, Seekers continued to die, and the Imperium. But the risk of disclosure, of awakening the galaxy to forbidden truths, lingered like a shadow across every world, every fleet, and every mind devoted to the master of mankind. And the secret custodians, the hidden cults, carried this knowledge silently, aware that in their hands rested the fate of billions and the precarious continuation of a god in chains. Faith is the strongest pillar of the Imperium. It binds worlds light years apart, sustains soldiers who march into unwinnable wars, and fuels the prayers whispered by the dying in the dark of space. That faith, like a flame, is fragile. Too much fuel and it burns out of control. Too little and it withers. The cults who harried the Emperor's secret knew this well. They walked a knife's edge, preserving a truth that could snuff out the flame or set it ablaze beyond control. For the common citizen, the Emperor was not a silent prisoner chained to a machine. He was radiant, eternal, the very embodiment of hope. The ecclesiarchy preached his divinity, filling temples with chants, hymns, and incense. Children were raised to see him as the light that guided humanity, not as a dying husk devouring Seekers by the thousands. It was this faith that held the Imperium together, more than the Adeptus Astartes, more than the Inquisition, more than any single army. Without faith, the Imperium would collapse into civil war, splintering into fractured kingdoms vulnerable to the claws of chaos. The cults knew this too, and so they became the unseen architects of faith. They whispered not only forbidden truths but also myths that shielded the truth. They crafted parables where silence was wisdom, where sacrifice was divine will, where the Emperor's chains were not weakness but proof of his transcendence. They shaped belief as much as they concealed knowledge, ensuring that the masses continued to bow their heads without asking too many questions. That shadows always grow where light shines. Rumors persisted across the stars, hints that the Emperor was not as he seemed. In hive taverns, drunken voicemen spoke of Seekers being dragged away. In monasteries, scribes recorded visions of the throne as a prison. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, whispers spread that the Emperor was not a god at all, but a man who had failed his sons, his people, and himself. The ecclesiarchy fought these rumors with fire and steel, sending confessors to purge heresy wherever it surfaced. But like weeds breaking through stone, doubt always found a way back. The cults, too, wrestled with doubt. Some members began to question whether their endless secrecy was a service to humanity or a betrayal. Was it right to preserve a faith built on lies? Was ignorance truly strength, or was it the slow poison of decay? These questions gnawed at even the most devout. For how long could one preserve a shadow without it devouring the light entirely? The Emperor himself remained silent. That silence was the one constant, echoing across millennia. Whether he was aware, whether he chose to withhold words, or whether he simply could not speak, none could say. And so, interpretation became everything. To some, silence was proof of his godhood, his will too vast for mortal words. To others, it was the silence of death, the quiet of a prison without a warden. And in that gulf of interpretation, entire belief systems grew, each convinced it held the key to the Emperor's true nature. Faith, shadow, secrecy, the triad defined the Imperium. The Astronomicans still burned, Sekers still died, and the galaxy still marched to war under banners of gold and black. But beneath the surface, the cost of immortality lingered like an unspoken wound. Every shrine, every cathedral, every sermon was built on foundations of silence and sacrifice. And though the people did not see the chains, though they did not hear the screams of Sekers consumed by the throne, their faith rested on the shadows those truths cast. The custodians and cultists bore the heaviest burden. They knew what others could not. They carried the weight of revelation and concealment alike, living in the tension between salvation and damnation. And as generations passed, their struggle became a parable in itself, a story of humanity's endless dance with secrets, with faith, with a thin line between light and shadow. Perhaps that is the true cost of immortality. Not merely the Seker's drain, not merely the chains of the throne, but the unending need to live in a world where truth can never be spoken, where faith must be both shield and weapon. The Emperor endures, the Imperium survives, and humanity fights on, but always in the shadow of a secret too vast to reveal. And so the chapter closes in silence. The silence of the throne. The silence of secrets. The silence of faith that endures because it cannot do otherwise. Perhaps the greatest truth of the Imperium is not that the Emperor lives or dies, not that he ascends or remains chained, but that his silence will forever shape humanity more than his words ever could. For in silence lies mystery, and in mystery faith, and in faith humanity's only hope against the darkness. The Emperor sits upon the golden throne, silent, eternal, bound by chains that no mortal can see, in a prison forged of flesh, metal, and psychic energy. For 10,000 years he has endured, neither speaking nor moving in any way that humans can comprehend. Yet his influence stretches across the stars, guiding fleets through the warp, sustaining planets, and holding back the darkness of chaos. Every day, thousands of Sekers die. Each life feeds the throne, each soul becomes fuel for the beacon of humanity. To most, these deaths are ritual, a sacred offering to the god they worship. To the Emperor, if he is aware, they may be a constant, agonizing reminder of the cost of immortality. A god in chains, a savior bound by sacrifice, yet the galaxy remains ignorant. The silent Emperor washes everything and nothing. He is both present and absent, a paradox of divinity. Those who glimpse even a fragment of his mind speak of corridors of golden light stretching into infinity, of whispers that cannot be spoken, of a presence so vast it is overwhelming. But these glimpses are fleeting, dangerous, and rare. Most who witness them are lost, consumed by the throne or driven mad by the immensity of his being. In the halls of Terra, the High Lords govern. They make decisions that shape billions of lives. Yet they govern not with the Emperor's guidance but with their understanding of his will. Every choice, every command, is measured against the necessity of keeping him alive. The Imperium's survival is a delicate balance, a tightrope walked upon the psychic essence of a god who cannot speak. That silence does not equal absence. The emperor's will courses through humanity, not as orders or commands, but as a quiet force, subtle and enduring. It shapes the decisions of leaders, the actions of soldiers, and the devotion of billions. His presence is felt in every prayer, every hymn, every act of courage, yet it is a presence wrapped in shadow, hidden from comprehension. Even in silence, the emperor is fear. Whispers of his power pervade the galaxy. Rumors of his wrath against traitors, his punishment of those who betray humanity, echo in the minds of soldiers and citizens alike. That alongside fear is reverent. Faith persists not because of what is spoken, but because of what remains unspoken, the unknowable magnitude of the master of mankind. And in that silence lies a lesson. For 10,000 years, the galaxy has endured. Civilizations rise and fall. Wars rage across the stars. Yet humanity persists, not through guidance, not through intervention, but through belief. Faith, built upon mystery, has become stronger than any command, more enduring than any army. The emperor's silence, paradoxically, ensures the continuity of his vision. Across the Imperium, secret cults, hidden custodians, and the observant mechanicus watch and record. They bear knowledge too dangerous to speak aloud. They preserve rituals, monitor the throne, and track the flow of sacred souls. Their devotion is meticulous, their work eternal. For the survival of the Imperium and the secrecy of the Emperor's chained divinity rest in their hand. And yet, despite all the sacrifices, all the vigilance, all the hidden knowledge, the Emperor's true state remains unknowable to the galaxy at large. No hymn tells the full story. No sermon reveals the truth. Even those closest to the throne cannot fully comprehend it. It is in this unknowability that the Imperium finds its paradoxical strength. Humanity endures because it believes in a God it cannot fully understand. It fights because it trusts a Savior who cannot speak. It survives because silence has become a language of guidance, and mystery a foundation of faith. The silent emperor endures, unseen, unheard, yet the axis upon which the galaxy turns. Bound, yet omnipresent. Sacrificed, yet immortal. And in that silence, all of humanity continues to live, fight, and pray. Across the endless sprawl of Terra, the heart of the Imperium pulses with the quiet rhythm of the gold throne. Its light reaches into the warp, a beacon for billions of worlds, guiding fleets, shaping tides of psychic energy, and warding against the ceaseless encroachment of chaos. The Astronomicon shines not only as a navigational tool, but as a symbol, a reminder that humanity endures, even if its God cannot speak. The sound of the throne is subtle, almost imperceptible to those outside the inner sanctum. A low hum vibrates through the endless corridors of Terra, a resonance that can be felt in bone and spirit. It is a pulse of life, sacrifice, and timeless vigilance, a sonic echo that whispers of worlds saved and lives consumed. To those attuned, the secret custodians, the hidden cultists, the psychic seers, this hum carries meaning. They interpret the variations, subtle shifts in tone and intensity, as signs of the Emperor's condition. A faltering note might indicate strain. A deepening resonance could signal an alignment of souls, a surge of psychic energy feeding the throne. Beyond the immediate halls, The ambient light of the Astronomicon casts golden rays into the void of space. Ships navigating the warp detect the faint shimmer, a thread linking mortal hearts across light years. For the common sailor, it is simply a star to follow, a point of hope in an otherwise dark and dangerous sea. But for those who know, every beam of light is a whisper from a silent god, a communication of presence without voice. The throne itself is a labyrinth of machinery and flesh, adorned with cables, conduits, and the incorporeal remnants of sectors long consumed. It glows with an otherworldly light, intricate and eternal. The air surrounding it hums with energy, charged and heavy with psychic potential. Steam rises in thin tendrils, dissipating into the vast chambers, carrying with it the scent of ozone, metal, and incense burned for millennia. Each breath drawn within this sanctum is a reminder that life, death, and divinity are intertwined here, inseparable in their weight and consequence. The custodians move silently, shadows against the glow, performing rituals that have persisted for centuries. They document the pulse of the Astronomicon, recording fluctuations, noting anomalies, and interpreting the endless rhythm of the Emperor's present. Their hands are steady, their minds focused, for any error could ripple through the galaxy. Even the smallest misstep, unnoticed by others, might alter the delicate balance of psychic energy that sustains humanity. In the quieter moments, when the throne's light reaches its apex, the hum resonates throughout Terra's underlevels, touching the most hidden corners. It is then that those attuned feel a subtle warmth, a reassurance that the Emperor, though silent and chained, still endures. This resonance is not a voice, but a presence that instills calm, even amid the knowledge of sacrifice and suffering. It is a lullaby for the galaxy, a quiet meditation that underpins the Imperium's relentless march. The shadowed chambers themselves seem to breathe in rhythm with the throne. Cables pulse like veins. Metallic conduits vibrate with unending energy, and in the golden light, reflections dance across the faces of the custodians, casting their expressions into transient forms of devotion, awe, and silent vigilance. Even in the warp, the Astronomicon's light ripples outward, reaching distant navigators. They see a faint shimmer, barely perceptible, yet enough to guide their vessels through the chaotic tides. It is a lifeline, a silent song, a tether to reality amidst the infinite void. For many, it is the first and last comfort in an unforgiving galaxy. And within this interplay of light, sound, and psychic resonance, the Emperor's presence lingers, silent, immobile, eternal, a god in chains, yet a beacon for the living. Each hum, each pulse, each beam of golden light is a reminder that sacrifice sustains life, that the galaxy survives because he endured, that the countless deaths, the hidden cults, the secret custodians, the whispered prayers all converge into one continuous echo that binds humanity together. The chambers themselves invite reflection. The flicker of lights along the walls, the rhythmic hiss of machinery, and the low hum of the throne create a meditative cadence. It slows the mind, softens the heart, and lulls the listener into a state of introspection. In this stillness, the enormity of the Emperor's sacrifice can be comprehended only in fragment. Each observation, each heartbeat, each flicker of the Astronomicon is a silent testament to the cost of survival, the weight of eternity, and the mystery that humanity may never fully understand. In the final analysis, the echoes of the throne are more than sound or light. They are a manifestation of endurance, of unseen vigilance, of a God's silent promise to his children. Even in the most distant sectors, even in the voids between stars, the presence of the golden throne is felt, a pulse that transcends comprehension, a hum that reverberates through souls, softening fear and instilling quiet awe, a whisper in silence that reminds all who perceive it. The Emperor endures, and humanity persists because of it. And so, the galaxy listens, not to words, not to commands, but to the echoes of a silent God, to the resonance of his chained divinity. And in those echoes, a strange comfort emerges, a lullaby for the restless, a meditation for the weary, and a path toward peace, if only in spirit. The golden light of the throne begins to soften, its glow stretching across the vast chambers of Terra, touching the stone and metal with a warmth both divine and mournful. A hum that once pulsed with certainty now fades into a gentle resonance, a quiet lullaby that vibrates through walls, floors, and the hearts of those who linger in the shadows. The Emperor remains bound, silent, eternal, yet his presence, though imperceptible to most, lingers like a shadow at the edge of perception. Every soul sacrificed, every sacker consumed, every whisper of faith contributes to this silent symphony. The cost is unfathomable, yet the necessity undeniable. The custodians move with solemn reverence, the forms swallowed by shadow and light alike. Each step is measured, each gesture deliberate. They are the guardians of a secret that could shatter galaxies, yet their minds are calm, their devotion absolute. Even the faintest ripple of the astronomicon guides them, a reminder that the silent God they protect is more than legend, more than myth, more than hope itself. Outside Terra, the Imperium persists. Stars burn, fleas traverse the warp, and billions continue to live and die under bars of gold and black. Yet none know the full truth of the Emperor's state, the cost of his survival, or the silent vigilance that sustains them all. Faith shields ignorance, and ignorance sustains faith. It is a delicate balance, a tapestry of shadow and light woven over millennia. The whispers of secret cults, the meticulous records of hidden custodians, and the echoes of the astronomicon converge into a single, eternal truth. The galaxy survives because the Emperor endures. And though his voice is forever silent, his influence permeates all, felt more than heard, understood more as instinct than intellect. The hum softens further, the golden beams stretching thin into the void. It is a gentle cadence, a meditation, a rhythm that slows the mind and eases the spirit. Here, in this silence, one can almost forget the endless wars, the sacrifices, the horrors of chaos and heresy. Here, there is only the quiet, the light, the eternal presence that guards humanity without a word. Time itself seems to bend in the presence of the throne. Seconds stretch into minutes, minutes into hours, hours into eternity. The custodians continue their silent watch, the cults whisper in shadows, and the galaxy spins unaware of the God who sustains it. And yet, in this unfolding stillness, a strange comfort arises. Though the cost is immense, though the suffering is unimaginable, humanity endures. Perhaps this is the Emperor's greatest gift. Not power, not command, not miracles, but persistence. In his silence, humanity finds the strength to continue, the courage to fight, the hope to survive. And in the shadows of faith, in the echoes of the throne, there exists a lullaby, a song for the weary, a balm for the restless, a final comfort before sleep. As the light fades to a soft shimmer, as the hum becomes a distant vibration, the mind drifts, worlds, fleets, and lives slip away into quiet reverie. The galaxy breathes in unison with the silent God, and for a fleeting moment, the horror and majesty of 10,000 years condense into a single, serene understanding that life continues, that faith endures, that the Emperor remains. And in this final moment of stillness, the galaxy listens, not to commands, not to proclamations, not to voices that can be heard, but to the silent God, bound yet eternal, whose secrets remain forever hidden. Perhaps the greatest truth of the Imperium is that no truth can ever be fully revealed. The Emperor's secret lies not in what is told, but in what is forever hidden. And as the hum of the throne fades, the light softens, and the shadows deepen, the listener drifts into the gentle embrace of mystery and faith, carried into sleep by the silent, eternal presence of the Master of Mayhem.